Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 1940s. The kitchen is quiet, but the war has already found the drawer where the ration books live. There is a pencil beside the shopping list, a paper bag folded for later, and a small piece of butter being watched with the kind of care usually given to jewellery, medicine, or a sleeping baby with expensive opinions. Tonight, we are following ordinary families as they try to eat their way through the Second World War. One coupon, Q, potato, thin soup, saved crust, and brave little spoonful at a time. Much of our journey begins on the British home front, where the Ministry of Food could reach into the cupboard with a leaflet and a very firm suggestion about carrots. But this was never one single wartime table. American families counted ration points and planted victory gardens. Families under occupation faced empty shops, dangerous markets, and food taken by force. In some places, hunger became a daily emergency, and the jokes will grow quieter there because history sometimes asks for plain words. Still, inside many kitchens, people did what families have always done when the world becomes unreasonable. They stretched, saved, swapped, planted, boiled, preserved, and gave the better piece to someone smaller while pretending they had never wanted it anyway. You will meet the ration book that permits a purchase without producing the food, the national loaf that arrives with excellent intentions and a rather serious personality, the dried egg that begins life looking faintly like building dust, and the potato, which quietly becomes breakfast, dinner, supper, and a member of the family. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into the strange corners of ordinary history, please like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. No pressure. The shopping queue already has enough of that, and it has been standing in the rain since before breakfast. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and which simple food you would protect first if your cupboard suddenly had to answer to a government department. The Quiet Hours is also on Spotify, so you can listen there while a calm stranger explains why a jar of dripping could become household property of almost emotional importance. Now dim the lights, put on a fan if you have one, pull the blanket up, and turn the pillow to the cool side. Let the modern kitchen fade away for a while, with its careless bananas and cheese that appears without paperwork. How thin can you spread butter before it becomes a memory? When does a potato stop being a vegetable and become the person in charge? The room grows darker, a wireless warms on the shelf. When you open your eyes again, it is January of 1942. Your ration book is in the drawer, the grocer knows your name, and someone has just announced that breakfast will involve an egg that has never met a chicken. You put the kettle on. Breakfast is now an administrative procedure. You open the kitchen drawer and find the ration books tucked beneath a folded tea towel, worn at the corners from being handled every week. Each person in the household has one, including the baby, who cannot read but has entered the national food system with impressive seriousness. The coupons do not give you free food, and they do not promise the shop will have what you need. They only give you permission to buy a small allowance if butter, bacon, sugar, or tea has managed to arrive. You check the pages before writing the list. Dinner begins here, not at the stove, but with paper, pencil, and the knowledge that one careless choice may follow you until next week. The drawer smells faintly of dust, soap, and old paper, the quiet scent of things handled by careful hands. You take the books out one by one and lay them on the kitchen table, keeping them away from the teacup because a damp coupon can cause more tension than a cracked plate. The covers are plain and official. They do not look like food, yet they now stand between your family and food with a calm little authority that makes the sugar bowl seem almost decorative. In Britain during the Second World War, rationing becomes part of daily life because the country depends heavily on imported food, and shipping is under strain from enemy submarines, military need, lost cargo space, and the simple fact that an island must keep being fed while the sea becomes dangerous. The system is meant to share scarce supplies more fairly. That matters. Before rationing, shortages and rising prices could leave poorer families watching better-off shoppers buy more than their share. A ration book cannot make a ship arrive, but it can stop one person from walking away with all the bacon while another person stands there holding hope and a string bag. Still, fairness on paper has to meet real shelves, real delivery times, real neighbourhoods, and real legs that may already be tired from queuing. You sharpen the pencil and begin to plan the week. A little bacon can flavour beans. A spoonful of fat can carry onions through a pan. A scrap of cheese grated over potatoes can suggest celebration. provided nobody asks for too much evidence. Meat may need to become stew. Tea must last. Sugar must be measured as if it is listening. The baby needs milk. The older child wants something sweet. You want a cup of tea that tastes less like a polite apology, but adulthood often means giving the better version of things to someone shorter. The ration book turns meals into arithmetic with feelings attached. You begin to think in ounces, in coupons, in days until the next visit, and in the quiet difference between what would be nice and what can be managed. A neighbour may mention that her sister has found a recipe for eggless cake. Your first reaction is interest. Your second is suspicion, because the word cake has been through enough already. You do not simply decide to bake. You check whether flour, fat, sugar, and egg can survive the decision. You do not simply buy tea. You see whether tea is allowed to continue being itself this week. The children notice the results before they understand the rules. They notice when cake is smaller, when jam is spread so thinly it has become a colour, when sweets are spoken of by older cousins with the grandeur of lost empire. You explain that everyone is doing their bit. It is true. It is also true that doing your bit often looks like staring at 2 ounces of butter and wondering whether it can be introduced to 7 breakfasts without causing a scene. Rationing also changes the way you think about waste. A stale crust is not finished. Bones have plans. Vegetable water may return as soup. A spoonful of leftover mash is not rubbish, but the opening argument for tomorrow. This is not only thrift. It is a whole new way of seeing the table. Every scrap is asked whether it has one more useful act left in it. There are also special needs to consider. Children, expectant mothers, and people with certain illnesses may qualify for extra supplies or welfare foods, but that means another errand, another collection point, another moment when a private need enters a public queue. Some days the system feels sensible. Some days it feels as though the war has sat down beside you and begun checking the pantry with cold fingers. Yet families learn. They exchange recipes over fences, listen to advice on the wireless, borrow from neighbours, stretch flavour, save drippings, and make plain meals feel cared for. The work is repetitive, but it is not small. It keeps children growing, workers standing, and households held together during a time when many things beyond the kitchen are coming apart. You stack the ration books again, aligning their softened edges, then slide them back beneath the tea towel. They are not precious in the pretty sense. They are precious like keys, matches, and the last quiet hour before morning begins. Without them, money is not enough. With them, food is still not certain. You close the drawer gently because there is no point being rude to the paperwork that decides whether bacon is visiting this week. The bell above the shop door gives a tired little ring as you step inside with your ration books and shopping bag. In wartime Britain, many families are registered with particular shops for rationed foods, so the grocer knows not only your allowance, but roughly how many mouths wait at your table. He may know which child hates cabbage, which aunt has started visiting suspiciously close to cheese day, and which husband still believes bacon should appear by force of character. Registration helps control supplies, but it also makes shopping personal. A kind grocer can make a week easier. An impatient one can make the counter feel very far from home. The shop smells of brown paper, tea, wooden shelves, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of biscuits that may be present only as a memory. Behind the counter, tins stand in careful rows with their labels turned forward, though some spaces have become more decorative than useful. Empty shelves develop a language of their own. Not today. Perhaps Thursday. Try again after the delivery. Ask quietly. Do not let the children see your face when the answer is no. You place the ration books on the counter and wait while the grocer opens them with the practiced air of a man who has become part shopkeeper, part accountant, and part neighbourhood weather system. He marks the purchase, checks the allowance, weighs the sugar, cuts the cheese, or explains that the delivery has not come. His pencil moves softly, but you watch it closely. A ration book is not a thing you leave to atmosphere. A mark in the wrong place can disturb the week. Shops are not only places of buying now, they are places of news, patience, small favours, and disappointments wrapped in brown paper. The grocer may say there is margarine but no butter, tea but not much, bacon but only if your turn arrives before the end of the piece. He may lower his voice and say a few oranges came in yesterday. All gone now, sorry. Sorry is a heavily rationed word too, though somehow everyone keeps using it. It covers empty crates, delayed ships, bad weather, missing deliveries, and the fact that your child had hoped for something bright after weeks of root vegetables. You nod, because everyone is short. You also feel the private irritation of being short in public. Other customers stand behind you, listening while pretending to examine soap. In ordinary times, shopping can hide inside routine. In wartime, it becomes a public statement about what your household needs and what it cannot have. The registered shop system helps prevent people from racing around town to gather more than their share. It also reduces the small panic that might otherwise spread whenever a delivery arrives, because a shop knows roughly whom it must serve. That does not remove worry. It merely gives worry a counter, a ledger, and a queue. It allows suppliers and officials to estimate demand. It gives the grocer a list of families and the government a way to manage scarce food, without turning every purchase into a contest of speed and money. It is practical. It also means the grocer becomes part of your household story whether you invited him or not. If an aunt is staying, the amounts may need adjusting. If someone is ill, there may be special arrangements. If you want to change shops, paperwork can appear, and paperwork has never once made a hungry child more patient, yet the relationship can be kind. A grocer who knows you may save bones for soup, suggest a cheaper cut, warn you when something is likely to run out, or point toward a tin you might otherwise miss. He may understand that the baby needs milk, that the old man upstairs struggles with hard crusts, or that your budget has become thinner than the tea. Many shopkeepers work under pressure too, dealing with ration rules, suppliers, inspectors, ledgers, queues, complaints, and the daily discipline of not snapping at the ninth person who asks whether there is more cheese hidden somewhere behind civilization. The answer is usually no. There are unwritten rules here too. You do not ask too boldly, you do not accuse, you do not linger if the people behind you are restless. You may ask whether anything else is expected later, but the question must be light enough to pass as politeness. Wartime shopping rewards patience, but it has very little time for drama beside the scales. You hand over coins and collect the parcels. They are small, but each has a future. The sugar is for tea and perhaps a pudding if the week behaves. The cheese will be grated, never sliced recklessly. The tea must last. Nothing in the bag is casual. Everything has already been assigned a duty before it reaches the door. As you turn to leave, the bell rings again, and another customer steps inside carrying the same careful hope. Outside, the street is cold. Your shopping bag is lighter than you wished, and more important than it looks. The grocer knows enough about your family dinner to qualify as a distant relative, though thankfully one who accepts coupons instead of conversation after supper. The shop is still closed when you join the line, and everyone ahead of you appears to be standing on both feet and a rumour. Someone has heard there may be oranges. Someone else insists it is onions. A third person has information from a cousin whose neighbour once spoke to a delivery driver, which gives the story the dignity of a minor broadcast. You wait with your bag folded over one arm while the pavement grows damp beneath your shoes. Queuing becomes one of the great domestic skills of the war. Coupons matter, but shelves matter more. When the shutter finally lifts, the whole line breathes in like a single cold person. Until then, you stand in the grey morning and learn the manners of scarcity. You keep your place without looking too proud of it. You remember who was ahead of you. You notice who is trying to look as though they were always there. Nobody makes a fuss yet, because the day is early and hope is still easily bruised. A pram waits near the curb with a child bundled inside, staring at the world as if rationing has personally failed him. An older woman shifts her basket from one hand to the other. A man in work clothes keeps checking his watch, measuring food against punctuality and finding both unreasonable. The shop window reflects the line back at itself. Hats, scarves, collars, tired eyes, empty bags ready to be filled or carried home almost empty. Queues form for many reasons during the war. Rationing sets allowances, but it cannot make food appear evenly in every shop at every hour. Ships may be delayed, a delivery may be smaller than expected. A storm, a transport problem, or a change in supply can turn a normal errand into a cold morning on the pavement. Unrationed items can be even more unpredictable, because they may arrive suddenly and vanish before most people know they were there. So people listen. Rumours become a second shopping list. You hear about onions at one shop, fish at another, dried fruit last week, lemons once, long ago, spoken of with the fragile glow usually given to childhood holidays. The talk moves gently down the line. Recipes are exchanged, advice is tested, complaints are made in a tone mild enough to pass as conversation. People learn which shops tend to receive deliveries, which streets hear news first, and which neighbour has a niece in a place where things occasionally arrive. None of this is official, but it matters. In wartime, information can be almost as useful as flour. A good rumour can save a journey. A bad one can send half the street toward a closed door and leave everybody carrying the same wet disappointment home. You pull your coat tighter. The damp works through the hem. Your fingers grow stiff around the handle of the bag. Someone behind you coughs. Farther down, a woman laughs softly, and for a moment the queue becomes less like a line and more like a temporary household assembled on the pavement. There is irritation, of course. There is always irritation where people are cold and uncertain. If supplies run out just before your turn, the disappointment is public. There is no private way to be the person who almost reached the oranges. Still, the queue has rules. You do not push. You do not pretend you were there earlier unless you enjoy being studied by 20 witnesses with excellent memories. You do not complain too loudly because everyone has the same problem and nobody has brought enough patience to share. The door opens at last. The line begins to move, not with excitement, but with the grave patience of people entering a place where the truth will soon be weighed. Each customer who comes out is inspected without anyone appearing to inspect them. A full bag spreads courage. A thin one darkens the mood. When your turn comes, you step inside into warmer air and the smell of shelves, paper, and faint spice. The grocer's face suggests he has already disappointed several people and has no great wish to continue, though history has scheduled him for the entire morning. You ask what came in. Not oranges. Onions. The news passes through you with a small adjustment of the heart. Onions are not the bright miracle the queue had briefly imagined, but they are not nothing. A child may not cheer for them, because children rarely greet onions like visiting royalty, but a cook knows better. They can soften in fat if fat is available, deepen a stew, improve potatoes, rescue soup, and make plain food smell as though it has more money than it does. You accept your share and place them in the bag. Outside, the line continues waiting for its own version of the answer. You walk home through the damp morning with onions instead of oranges. The disappointment is real. So is the supper they will help become. That is the strange discipline of the queue. Learning to mourn the thing that did not come while respecting the thing that did. Wartime teaches many lessons, and one of them is that hope should always bring a shopping bag large enough for a different vegetable. A government leaflet lies beside the mixing bowl, explaining with calm confidence that yesterday's bread, a tired carrot, and a little imagination can still become something called supper. The Ministry of Food does not simply ration supplies. It advises, persuades, publishes recipes, speaks through wireless programs, and tries to keep the country fed without sounding too worried about the saucepan. Some advice is sensible. Some requires a generous relationship with the word tasty. You read the instructions while peeling vegetables into a bowl. There is comfort in being guided, and slight alarm in realizing the government now has an opinion about your pudding. The leaflet is printed in plain type, practical and brisk, as though no recipe has ever met a child who dislikes turnips on principle. It tells you to save fuel, cook efficiently, use seasonal produce, keep scraps, avoid waste, and think about nutrition. These are good ideas. They're also easier to admire before the youngest member of the household announces that carrots are unacceptable today because of reasons too advanced for adult understanding. The Ministry of Food has an enormous job. Britain must feed civilians, protect health, control prices, manage imports, encourage home production, and keep morale steady while ships, farms, labour, storage, and transport are all under strain. Officials worry not only about empty stomachs, but about tired workers, growing children, pregnant women, older people, and families who might fill up on tea and bread because little else is simple. So the ministry speaks wherever it can. There are leaflets, posters, newspaper columns, wireless talks, public demonstrations, mobile kitchens, and advice delivered with the firm kindness of someone who has brought weighing scales to a crisis. You may learn how to cook dried egg, use oatmeal, make soup from bones, save vegetable water, stretch meat, bake with less sugar, or treat the potato as if it has been elected to a senior position. The advice often arrives with practical measurements and a tone of steady encouragement. It does not say that you are tired. It assumes you are, and then hands you a method for making the tiredness slightly more useful. The advice can feel intimate. One office worries about shipping. Another worries about protein. Another worries about whether families are boiling vegetables until every vitamin has fled the pan in understandable protest. Another seems very concerned about your crusts. You turn the leaflet over and study a recipe that promises economy and nourishment. It does not promise applause. Many wartime recipes are built on the sensible belief that if food is hot, filling, and not actively alarming, the family should make an effort. The names can be hopeful. A dish may be called savoury, nourishing, economical, or family style, which sometimes means it has entered the room without meat and would prefer not to discuss it. This is not unfair. Many people are genuinely grateful. They also remember what butter used to do for mashed potatoes, and memory is rarely rationed with any discipline. The phrase according to availability becomes the hinge of wartime cooking. If you have leeks, use leeks. If not, use onions. If not, use cabbage. If not, stand near the pan and look resourceful. Real kitchens are where paper instructions meet burned handles, tired feet, children with opinions, and cupboards that do not always respect official optimism. You cannot cook with an ingredient that did not arrive, no matter how neatly it is written. Still, the ministry's work matters. Behind the brisk tone is a serious attempt to keep ordinary people from becoming ill while still asking them to accept meals that may look smaller than memory. Rationing in Britain is not only about limiting food, it is also about trying to keep the population fed in a balanced way, especially when poorer families might otherwise be pushed toward the cheapest and least nourishing choices. Advice about vegetables, milk, wholemeal bread, vitamins, and economical cooking can help protect health. Some of it is remembered fondly. Demonstration cooks show women how to make the best of dried foods, unfamiliar mixtures, and ingredients that arrive with more usefulness than glamour. Some of it is remembered because the resulting dish was difficult to forget for other reasons. You scrape carrot peelings into a bowl for stock or compost. Nothing useful leaves the kitchen without being asked a few questions. Potato water may thicken soup, bones may return as broth, stale bread may become pudding. A spoonful of leftovers may be renamed with enough confidence to survive lunch. The leaflet rests near your elbow, not quite bossy, but certainly present. It suggests that waste is unpatriotic, that vegetables are noble, and that dessert can continue its life with very little sugar if everyone lowers expectations together. There is something touching in the effort, even when the recipes strain friendship. The government is trying to speak into millions of kitchens and help ordinary people turn shortage into routine. The tone is brisk because panic would not improve the stew. You fold the leaflet and place it beside the clock where you can find it again. You pin the leaflet under the sugar basin, so it will not curl at the edge. The vegetables are ready, the pan is warm. Supper may be plain, but it has guidance, and tonight that counts for something. The pudding, however, remains under official observation. You cut into the national loaf and feel the knife slow down. The bread is darker and denser than the soft white loaf many families preferred before the war, made from flour that uses more of the grain and is meant to conserve wheat while improving nutrition. Officials approve of it. Housewives discuss it. Children examine it with the suspicion children usually reserve for new teachers and boiled greens. Toast helps, though jam would help more, and jam has its own problems. You spread the slice with a careful trace of margarine. The bread is filling, plain, and deeply present. It has not come to entertain breakfast. It has come to report for duty. The loaf sits on the board with the solid confidence of something designed by people thinking about shipping. Before the war, many families prefer white bread when they can afford it, soft and pale and gentle on the imagination. War changes the calculation. Wheat imports are under pressure, shipping space is precious, and wasting the nutritious parts of the grain begins to look foolish when every cargo matters. The national loaf uses a higher extraction flour, which means more of the grain goes into the bread. That helps stretch supplies and adds useful nutrients, but it also produces a loaf many people find coarse, grey, heavy, or simply too serious for breakfast. You lift a slice and feel its weight. This is not bread that vanishes politely under jam. It remains in the hand. It expects chewing. The children may complain about the colour. Someone may say it tastes healthy, which is often how food is described when praise has run short. You toast it near the fire or under the grill and wait for the edges to darken. The smell is warm and grainy, comforting in its own way, though not quite the soft bakery scent people remember from peacetime. Memory is a difficult ingredient. It improves the old loaf and then stands beside the new one looking disappointed. You scrape margarine across the surface and try to reach the corners. Butter would be better, but wartime breakfast is not holding interviews for luxury. A little marmalade might help if you have any. Dripping might appear later in the day. Cheese would make it splendid, which is precisely why cheese is not casually available whenever bread feels lonely. The national loaf becomes part of a wider effort to protect health and conserve food. It is not just a loaf, though everyone at the table would be grateful if it behaved more like one and less like a national project. It gives calories, fibre, and more vitamins and minerals than highly refined white bread. For families whose diets are narrowed by rationing, that matters. Official nutrition may sound dull until a child needs to grow, a worker needs strength, or an older person needs something warm and filling. Then dull begins to look rather useful. Still, useful food must face the court of breakfast, where the judges are tired, underfed, and deeply attached to what things used to taste like. People grumble. They compare it to pre-war bread. They joke about its weight. They search for ways to improve it with soup, gravy, jam, dripping, or enough toast marks to suggest transformation. The loaf can support a meal in several ways. This matters because bread is one of the foods that holds a household together when the rest of the plate is uncertain. It can calm a hungry child, fill a lunch tin, steady a thin soup, and make breakfast feel official enough to begin the day. A thick slice beside stew makes the bowl feel less lonely. Stale ends become crumbs, pudding, stuffing, or toast. Scraps return because nothing in the wartime kitchen is allowed to leave after only one appearance. You cut another slice, thinner this time, because the bread must last and because your arm has understood the situation. On the table, tea waits in cups. The room is cool. A child swings one foot beneath the chair and asks whether bread was better before the war. You pause, because the honest answer is not simple. White bread was softer. This bread is more nourishing. The child looks unimpressed by nourishment, which has never been childhood's favourite argument. You place the plate closer and give the slice a little more margarine than planned. Some negotiations are worth the loss. The child eats. This is victory on a very small plate, which is where many wartime victories choose to live. Outside, the morning moves slowly through blackout curtains and cold windows. The wireless murmurs in the next room. Somewhere, officials are discussing flour extraction, imports, milling, and public health. Here, at the table, the matter is simpler. The toast is tough, the tea is hot, and everyone has something to eat. The slice is not perfect. It is a little rough, a little heavy, and not especially interested in praise. That is not glamour. It is not abundance. It is breakfast doing its best under supervision. The national loaf may never be warmly loved, but it is difficult to ignore a loaf that keeps turning up, filling plates, and quietly winning the argument by refusing to be wasted. You tip dried egg powder into a bowl and pause for a moment because hope sometimes needs time to gather itself. Fresh eggs are scarce and uncertain, so powdered egg becomes a practical substitute in many kitchens. Mixed with water, it can be scrambled, baked into cakes, or folded into recipes where it behaves well enough if nobody asks too many personal questions. It keeps, travels, and feeds people, which are serious virtues in wartime. Still, the distance between this yellow dust and a warm egg in a shell is not small. You stir the bowl slowly. Somewhere far away, a chicken remains free of responsibility. The bowl sits under your hand while the powder darkens into a paste, and for a few seconds the kitchen feels like a small laboratory that has misplaced its enthusiasm. Before the war, an egg can be ordinary enough to crack without ceremony. It can go into a child's breakfast, a sponge cake, a custard, a pudding, a batter, or a frying pan, and no one needs to discuss shipping, storage, or hens with national importance. War changes that. Fresh eggs depend on poultry feed, transport, farm labour, and distribution, all of which become more difficult. Many households keep hens if they have space, but not every family has a garden, a shed, or neighbours willing to listen to poultry express opinions at dawn. Some children receive priority foods. Some sick people may qualify for special allowances. For many ordinary kitchens, dried egg is the reliable visitor. It does not need a shell, a nest box, or a chicken in a mood to cooperate. It arrives in a packet or tin and waits patiently on the shelf, which is more than can be said for most fresh food during wartime. You add water by careful degrees because instructions matter here. Too little and the mixture sulks, too much and it becomes a thin yellow argument. The smell is not unpleasant exactly, but it is not the warm, rich smell of an egg broken into a pan either. It is practical. Practical has its own scent. You beat it with a fork, watching lumps disappear against the side of the bowl. The Ministry of Food encourages people to use dried egg in cooking because it adds protein, helps baking, and reduces pressure on fresh supply. It can make scrambled egg, though the result has to be approached with manners. It can enrich mashed potato, bind fish cakes, thicken puddings, and lend structure to cakes where a real egg would once have appeared with very little fuss. Many households learn the tricks. Add a little salt. Cook it gently. Do not expect the glamour of a breakfast hotel. Do not let anyone stare at it for too long before eating. You pour the mixture into a pan and listen as it begins to set. If there is a small piece of fat available, the sound is almost cheerful. If not, the pan may require negotiation. A fresh egg carries softness and shine. Dried egg carries duty. It is useful, nourishing, and slightly humbling, which is a combination wartime food seems to favour. Children may accept it more easily if it arrives inside cake. Adults may say it is not bad, a phrase that does a great deal of polite lifting. It is not bad means it could be worse, it fills a space, and no one has cried yet. Recipes of the period often ask dried egg to perform quietly in the background, where its differences are less exposed. It helps a pudding hold together. It supports a batter. It allows a cake to rise enough to be called a cake without inviting cross-examination. In a household where sugar and fat are also limited, even that is valuable. You remember the old way of baking, when eggs entered the bowl with a crack, one after another, and the mixture turned glossy beneath the spoon. Now the process is slower, more careful, and more aware of its own substitutions. You scrape the last streaks from the bowl because powder is not something to waste. Every grain has travelled through a war to reach the table. It may have crossed the Atlantic, passed through warehouses, survived rationing systems, and waited in a cupboard until breakfast required courage. There is a quiet dignity in that, even if the dignity looks a little lumpy before cooking. You carry plates to the table. The children look interested, cautious, or both. Someone asks whether it is real egg. You answer with the kind of truth that keeps a morning peaceful. It is egg, you say. And that is close enough for toast. The first mouthful is warm and soft, though different. Not awful, not splendid. It belongs to that great wartime category of food that is better than its appearance and less exciting than its name. After breakfast, the packet returns to the shelf. It has not replaced the hen in anyone's heart, but it has helped fill the plate, and during the war that is a respectable career for a powder. Later, when people complain about it, they will still remember how useful it was. Wartime kitchens are full of such relationships, affectionate in hindsight and suspicious at the table. You wash the bowl and leave it to dry, grateful and unconvinced in equal measure. The week's butter sits on its paper like a tiny domestic inheritance. You unwrap it carefully, because fat gives flavour, helps cooking, and makes plain food feel kinder than it is. Butter, margarine, lard, and dripping must all be watched. Dripping from roasted meat is saved in a jar, cooled, guarded, and later spread or used for cooking with the respect due to something that has survived Sunday. You hold the knife almost flat against the bread. A child asks for more. You say it has to last, and the sentence sounds stricter than you feel. The real argument is not with the child, it is with a supply line somewhere beyond the sea. The butter has arrived in a piece so modest that calling it a block would feel generous. It rests near the edge of the plate, pale and firm, already divided in your mind into breakfasts, sandwiches, a bit of cooking, and one small emergency where morale may require toast to taste like something better than duty. Fat is one of the things rationing makes people notice immediately, because it does so much quiet work. It browns onions, softens cabbage, enriches mashed potato, greases tins, carries flavour, and turns a dry slice of bread into a meal that seems to care about you. Without it, food can still fill the stomach, but it loses warmth around the edges. Before the war, you may not have thought of fat as a household treasure. Now you look at the paper it came in and wonder whether even that has absorbed something useful. Butter is rationed, margarine becomes common, cooking fats are measured, and lard must be treated with serious discipline. If meat appears, the fat that runs from it is not waste, it is future flavour. You pour it into a jar, let it cool, and place it where it can be reached but not casually raided by anyone with bread and optimism. Dripping can be spread on toast, used to fry, added to pastry, or stirred into plain food to give it depth. It is not elegant, but elegance has very poor timing in a wartime kitchen. You learn to use the knife differently. A thick spread belongs to memory. Now the blade skims, presses, and coaxes. Margarine reaches places butter cannot. A little fat melted in a pan must serve the whole meal, so the heat is watched carefully. Too hot, and it disappears before doing enough useful work, which feels personal even though it is only chemistry. You adjust the flame. Cooking has become a chain of small economies. The coupon, the pan, and the clock all seem to be involved, each one insisting it has an important contribution to the evening. There are substitutes and stretchers. Suet may go into puddings. Bacon fat, when available, is saved. A rind can flavour soup. A spoonful of dripping can make fried bread, though fried bread begins to feel like a celebration with a suspiciously practical face. You may hear advice about using less fat in cakes or replacing it where possible, but some recipes simply become different creatures. Pastry with too little fat grows tough. Cakes become plainer. Biscuits lose their old snap. You still bake when you can, because a warm smell in the kitchen is not only food, it is morale moving through the house in a form children understand. A small pudding can make a week feel less narrow. Even then, the fat must be counted. You scrape the bowl clean with care, and the spoon against the china makes a soft, final sound. Children notice butter most directly at the table. They see the amount, see the knife, and learn that more is not always available just because more is wanted. This is not a lesson any parent enjoys teaching. You soften the edge of it when you can. You add extra gravy. You mash potatoes well. You toast the bread so that a thin spread seems warmer and richer than it is. You say the same phrases families say everywhere during shortage. That will do, take a little, leave some for tomorrow, we shall manage. These phrases are gentle, but they are also walls. They keep disappointment from spilling over the table. Fat also carries class differences. A family with land, livestock, connections, or rural relatives may manage better than one depending entirely on shops. A household with time can render, save, and cook slowly. A household worn down by paid work, childcare, night watches, and queues may have fewer choices. Rationing tries to share, but labour is unevenly shared. The careful saving often falls on the person who cooks, and that person must make scarcity taste less like arithmetic. You fold the butter paper back over the remaining piece and return it to the coolest place you have. There is something almost tender in the gesture, not because butter deserves tenderness exactly, but because the household depends on these tiny acts of preservation. The jar of dripping waits nearby, cloudy and plain, holding the memory of a meal that has already passed. Later, it may make potatoes sizzle. It may rescue cabbage. It may give toast a shine that looks almost hopeful. For now, it sits on the shelf with the quiet pride of something that used to be leftovers and has since accepted a promotion. The kettle begins to sing, and the room softens by a small but noticeable amount. Tea is rationed, yet its value cannot be measured only in ounces. It warms hands, fills pauses, welcomes neighbours, and lets adults behave as if civilization is still sitting politely at the table. You use fewer leaves and give them more time. A second brewing may follow, paler but still useful, like a memory wearing a brown coat. Milk and sugar depend on their own allowances, so the final cup may be modest. Nobody calls it modest, it is tea. Some words must remain firm. You warm the pot if there is time, though wartime mornings often treat time as another rationed item. The tea leaves go in carefully, fewer than you would once have used, and the hot water follows with a soft rush of steam. For a moment, the kitchen smells almost normal. That matters more than anyone admits. Tea is not just a drink in wartime Britain, it is a ceremony small enough to survive hardship and familiar enough to steady the room. People drink it before work, after bad news, during queues, in shelters, beside sick beds, and when a neighbour comes to the door with a question that really means she needs company. The ration may be small, but the habit is large. A cup of tea gives your hand something to hold while the wireless speaks of battles, shipping losses, factory targets, and weather over places your family has learned to pronounce with worry. You pour the first cup and judge the colour. Too pale and it feels defeated. Too strong and the tin empties faster. The correct wartime cup lives somewhere between comfort and mathematics. You add milk if there is enough, sugar if the week permits it, and if not, you drink it plainer than you prefer. People tell themselves they have grown used to less sugar. This may be true. It may also be a story told to the tongue until the tongue stops arguing. Used tea leaves are not thrown away quickly. They may be brewed again, or mixed with a few fresh leaves to coax another pot from the same beginning. The second cup is thinner, but it is still warm. Warmth counts. In a cold house with blackout curtains and damp shoes near the door, warmth can feel like a small private victory. The teapot stays under a cosy if the household has one, because keeping heat is another way of saving. Fuel is watched. Gas, coal, and electricity all carry their own worries. A hot drink made once and stretched carefully belongs to a pattern repeated all through the kitchen. Use less, make it last, do not waste what has already worked once. Tea has a social life too. If someone comes in from a queue, you offer a cup. If a neighbour has bad news, you offer a cup. If there has been an air raid, you offer a cup. If nothing has happened except the ordinary pressure of the day, you may still offer a cup because ordinary pressure has been working long hours. The offer does not require abundance. Even a weak cup says, "Sit down, you are not alone," and the kettle has agreed to help. This is why tea remains emotionally important even when the ration is limited. It gives people a gesture that looks like hospitality when there is little else to spare. It makes a poor biscuit seem less lonely. It lets people pause without saying they are frightened, tired, disappointed, or waiting for a letter. The cup can hold more than tea. Children may receive milk or cocoa when available, but adults often build their day around the pot. In factories and offices, tea breaks become moments of repair. In homes, the sound of the kettle marks the hour. In shelters, a flask can turn a cold night into something more bearable. You learn to value these small markers because the war has taken away so much ordinary timing. Meals shift, sleep breaks, news interrupts. Sirens begin when pans are on the stove. Tea offers a rhythm that still belongs to the household. You lift the pot and pour again, tilting it longer than usual to persuade the last cup toward decency. The leaves have done respectable work. They have coloured water, warmed hands, softened conversation, and helped at least one adult avoid saying something sharp before breakfast. That is not a minor achievement. You set the pot back down and listen to the faint clink of cup against saucer. Outside, the street is dull and cold. Inside, the steam rises and curls near the window. This cup will not change the war. It will not fill the pantry, summon oranges, or make sugar reappear. It will simply sit in your hands and be tea, which is sometimes the most practical miracle available. You take a careful sip. It is weak, yes, but still standing. Later, when the pot is empty, you may tip the leaves away with a little regret, as if dismissing someone who has done more than expected on poor wages. Tomorrow you will measure again, wait again, and hope the first cup has enough strength to introduce the day properly. The butcher wraps the meat in paper and ties it with string while you watch the parcel become smaller than your plans. Meat rationing often makes the grand roast an occasional visitor rather than a weekly certainty. Cheaper cuts, offal, bones, sausages, mince, and slow cooking begin to carry more of the household's hopes. The butcher has seen every kind of budget approach his counter with a brave face. He may suggest how to stretch the piece with vegetables, gravy, or a careful knife. You accept the parcel and put it in your bag. It will not dominate Sunday dinner, but with enough patience it may still make a speech. The paper is warm from his hands and faintly damp where the meat rests inside. It is not a proud joint, not the remembered centerpiece of easier Sundays, but a smaller piece that will need help from potatoes, onions, stock, and whoever in the house is prepared to speak well of gravy. In Britain, meat rationing is often calculated by value rather than by a simple fixed weight, which means the allowance depends on price as well as appetite. A cheaper cut can go farther if you know how to cook it slowly. A dearer piece may look lovely and vanish before the vegetables have introduced themselves. So the wartime cook becomes a student of cuts that once received less applause. Shin, brisket, liver, kidney, bones, and scraps all have uses when treated with time and respect. Some parts need long simmering. Some need flour, onion, and patience. Some need everyone at the table to accept that texture is part of the national struggle. The butcher may advise you because he knows what is possible. He knows which cuts can stew, which bones will make stock, which small piece can flavour a pot, and which customer will be offended by liver no matter how gently it is suggested. The shop itself feels different from the memory of pre-war abundance. Hooks may hang with less on them, sawdust may still cover the floor, the counter may still gleam, but the conversation has changed. People ask not only what is good, but what will stretch. They ask what is available, what is allowed, what can feed children, what can survive until Monday, and what can be disguised if it has a name the family mistrusts. Meat becomes a kind of guest appearance. It gives flavour rather than bulk. A little bacon can season beans, a bone can deepen soup, a small amount of mince can be spread through cottage pie or rissoles with breadcrumbs and mashed potato. Offal, when available, may provide nourishment at lower cost, though it arrives with stronger opinions at the table. Liver has iron and character. Kidney has flavour and a smell that announces itself before being invited. You carry the parcel home and place it on the table as if it is both precious and inadequate. There is no shame in the inadequacy. The war has made small parcels normal. The work now is to make them feel less small. You trim carefully, saving every piece that can be saved. Fat goes aside, bones are kept for stock. Any juices on the paper are considered with deep attention, though it is only lunch trying not to escape. The pan warms, onion enters if you have one. The smell begins to change the room. This is one of meat's powers. Even a little can make a kitchen feel fuller than the plate will be. The children notice. Someone asks whether it is a roast. You say it is dinner, which is both true and usefully vague. Slow cooking becomes a friend. A stew can forgive a tough cut. A suet pudding can hide small pieces in warmth. Gravy can persuade vegetables to join the same story. Potatoes thicken, carrots sweeten, barley stretches, and a spoon turns everything over until the pot looks more generous than the ration book intended. This is not trickery exactly. It is domestic persuasion conducted with a wooden spoon. The goal is not to pretend there is more meat than there is, but to make the meat share itself properly. Class and location matter here too. Rural families, people who keep rabbits or hens, or households with relatives in farming areas may have access to extras others cannot easily get. Urban families relying on shops feel shortages more directly. Black market meat exists, but it costs money, risk, and sometimes conscience. Many families stay within the rules, partly from principle and partly because breaking them is not as simple as dramatic stories suggest. Most survival is not daring. It is repetitive, lawful, careful, and done while children ask what is for tea. By Sunday, the little parcel has become a larger meal through strategy. A stew reaches the table. There is bread for dipping, potatoes enough to make it respectable, and meat visible in a way that encourages hope without inviting counting. You serve the children first, then the adults. Everyone eats more slowly than usual. The flavour matters because it has been waited for. When the plates are cleared, the bones are not finished. They return to the pot for stock, because even Sunday dinner must consider its future. The roast may have lost its old empire, but it has learned a wartime skill, how to appear briefly, leave flavour behind, and let the vegetables believe they were always the main event. Woolton pie reaches the table with steam rising through the crust and very little interest in glamour. Beneath it are potatoes, carrots, swede, cauliflower, or whatever vegetables have appeared with the season and consented to be chopped. The dish is filling, practical, and connected to wartime advice about nutrition and saving meat. Naming it after the Minister of Food gives the pie a certain official posture, as if supper has arrived wearing a badge. You cut into it and serve the first portion. The family looks down at the plate with quiet patriotic effort. The vegetables have done their best, so, for that matter, has everyone else. The crust cracks softly under the spoon, and the smell that rises is warm, earthy, and honest, in a way that suggests nobody has hidden a lamb chop underneath as a surprise. Woolton pie becomes one of the famous symbols of British wartime cooking, linked to Lord Woolton, the Minister of Food, and promoted as a sensible meatless dish during a time when meat is scarce and vegetables are expected to be more ambitious. The recipe varies because wartime recipes must respect whatever is actually in the basket. Potatoes give body, carrots bring sweetness, swede adds bulk, cauliflower, parsnip, turnip, or onions may appear if they are available. Herbs help, especially if the garden has been kind. A little gravy or vegetable stock can hold everything together. The topping may be pastry, potato, or something adjusted to the weak supply of flour and fat. A pie crust in wartime cannot always be as rich as memory would like. It has to be practical, and practical pastry is sometimes pastry with its shoulders squared. You serve it in thick spoonfuls. The colours are plain but cheerful enough. Orange carrot, pale potato, soft green if cabbage or leeks have found their way inside. The plate is not empty. That matters. A meatless meal can still be filling when the cook understands starch, seasoning and heat. Officials like Walton pie because it fits the message of the time. Eat vegetables. Save meat. Use what is grown at home. Waste nothing. Keep healthy. Make the meal solid enough that nobody spends the evening staring into the bread bin with philosophical interest. The dish also suits the campaign to persuade people that good food does not always require a centerpiece from the butcher. This is sensible, though it asks the British public to adjust some very old feelings about dinner. For many families, meat has long carried status, comfort, and the sense that a meal has properly happened. Without it, the plate may look unfinished, even when it is nutritious. Walton pie tries to solve this by arriving as a named dish rather than a heap of boiled vegetables. Names help. They give structure to disappointment. A carrot stew may sound like what happened because the shop failed you. Walton pie sounds like a plan. You lift the first forkful and taste potato, stock, sweetness, and the soft heaviness of food meant to last the evening. It is not bad. It may even be good if the cook has browned the top, seasoned well, and avoided boiling the vegetables into surrender. But it is also a meal carrying a message, and families are very good at detecting messages in food. Children may wonder where the meat has gone. Adults may praise the texture with slightly more volume than necessary. Someone may say it is very nourishing, which is often what people say when they are trying not to mention sausages. Still, the pie fills plates. It uses British-grown vegetables. It makes a warm meal from what is available. It can be stretched for larger families and repeated with variations, which matters because repetition is easier to bear when the ingredients change costumes. One week there is more carrot, another week more potato. If an onion appears, morale improves. If a little cheese can be scraped over the top, the dish begins to look almost proud of itself. The kitchen around you is warm now, windows cloud at the edges. A child drags a fork through the filling, perhaps searching for evidence of something more exciting. You say it is good for you, then immediately regret choosing the least persuasive sentence in the adult language. The child eats anyway, because hunger is a strong editor of opinion. The meal joins a long line of wartime dishes that depend on a family's willingness to accept substitution without making it the subject of a full domestic inquiry. In that sense, Walton pie is not only food, it is an agreement. The cook agrees to make vegetables interesting. The family agrees not to compare everything to peacetime. The government agrees, from a safe distance, that this should be plenty. The last agreement is the easiest to make when one is not at the table. Yet there is no denying the dish's usefulness. It answers a real problem with available ingredients. It feeds people. It supports the idea that the home front can adapt. You clear the plates and notice that most of it has gone. That is success, even if applause is absent. A little remains in the dish, enough for someone's lunch tomorrow if guarded properly. You cover it and set it aside. Walton pie may not make anyone forget roast beef, but it has managed the more important wartime achievement of appearing on the table, filling the family, and leaving behind just enough leftovers to continue its government service. You carry a sack of potatoes into the kitchen and set it somewhere cool and dark. Potatoes are dependable, filling, and flexible, which makes them one of the safest friends a wartime cook can have. They can be boiled, baked, mashed, grated, stretched into pastry, added to soup, or returned at the next meal wearing a slightly different expression. Alongside carrots, cabbage, onions, and swede, they help keep plates full when meat and fat are limited. The potato never makes a fuss. It simply appears again and again until the family stops greeting it as food and begins treating it as a reliable lodger. The sack lands with a soft, earthy thud, and a little dust clings to your fingers as you loosen the string. There is comfort in weight during a shortage. Butter may arrive in a piece too small for ambition. Meat may appear only as a careful parcel. Sugar may have to be counted with the focus of a jeweller. But potatoes give the cook something solid to work with, and solid begins to feel almost luxurious. In Britain, potatoes are not rationed in the same way as many other foods, though supply, quality, and availability can still vary. They are encouraged because they grow well at home, provide energy, fill the stomach, and can take the place of foods that shipping and rationing have made uncertain. The Ministry of Food promotes them with great seriousness, and for once the advice does not require the public to pretend a substitute is just as nice as the thing it replaced. A potato is not pretending to be steak. It is fully aware of being a potato, and that confidence helps. You carry them to the scullery or pantry, checking for soft spots, sprouts, or bruises. Good storage matters. A wasted potato is not just a lost vegetable, it is a future meal that has quietly failed its appointment. Kept cool, dark, and dry, a sack can support a family through many dinners. You learn which ones are best for mashing, which hold together in soup, and which collapse usefully into a thickening cloud. A baked potato can become supper if there is a little dripping, cheese, or gravy. Mashed potato can stretch a pie, crown a cottage pie when meat is scarce, or appear beside vegetables with enough salt to suggest generosity. Leftover mash can be shaped into cakes and fried, if fat allows. Grated potato can help pastry when flour and fat need saving. Potato water can enter bread or soup. Even peelings may be watched carefully, because waste has become a household scandal carried out quietly beside the sink. You wash them in cold water and feel the grit loosen under your thumb. The kitchen smells of damp earth, steam, and something steady. Potatoes do not bring the thrill of oranges or chocolate. Children do not run into the room shouting that potatoes have arrived, unless they have been raised in a very specialized form of enthusiasm. Yet when hunger is ordinary, dependable food becomes beloved in quieter ways. It appears at breakfast fried with leftovers. It appears at dinner under gravy. It returns at supper in soup. It is there when the butcher has little to offer, when the grocer has shaken his head, when the garden has produced more weeds than beans. A good potato does not solve the war, but it can make the table look less defeated. The work, of course, falls into your hands. Scrubbing, peeling, chopping, boiling, draining, mashing, saving, reheating. The potato's flexibility is useful, but it is not magical. Someone must carry the sack. Someone must lift the pan. Someone must judge how long it can boil without becoming watery and sad. Wartime cooking often praises the ingredient, but the ingredient does not peel itself, perhaps wisely, since it would then probably be given a form to complete. You add a pinch of salt and watch the pan begin to tremble. Steam clouds the window. A child comes in and asks what is for dinner. You say potatoes with the calmness of someone who has learned that tone can do half the seasoning. There may be cabbage too. There may be a little gravy if the bones have been cooperative. There may even be a scrap of bacon stirred through, which will give the whole dish an air of having met prosperity in the hallway. In poorer households, potatoes can be vital. In larger families, they stretch everything else. In gardens and allotments, they reward labour more reliably than many fussier crops. They also connect the household to the land at a time when imports are uncertain, and every ship has too many demands placed upon it. When you drain the pan, the potatoes fall against one another with soft, heavy sounds. You mash them carefully, adding whatever fat can be spared, and perhaps a little milk if the smallest cups have already been served. The result is not glamorous. It is pale, warm, and generous in the way wartime food most needs to be. You spoon it onto plates and let it spread beneath the rest of dinner, quietly making less look like enough. By the end of the meal, the pot is nearly empty. Tomorrow, another potato will be asked to perform a different duty, and it will do so without complaint. The potato is not a hero exactly, but by this point it has earned a chair at the table. You push the spade into a patch of ground that recently believed it was a lawn. Across Britain, gardens, allotments, parks, and spare land are turned toward food production, as families are urged to grow what they can. A flower bed may become beans. A neat border may become onions. A pleasant stretch of grass may discover that wartime has ended its career in looking nice. The work is muddy, tiring, and not always successful, especially when slugs arrive with private plans. Still, a few rows of vegetables can matter. You lean on the spade and look over the soil. The garden is no longer ornamental, it has been drafted. The first cut is awkward, because grass has shallow roots but deep confidence. It has spent years being walked on, trimmed, admired, and occasionally complained about by neighbours, and now it is expected to become lunch. You lift a square of turf and turn it over, exposing damp soil, pale roots, and one worm that seems to have received no notice from the government. Dig for Victory is more than a slogan. It is a national push to increase homegrown food, reduce pressure on imports, and make use of every small piece of land that can reasonably produce something edible. Posters, leaflets, radio talks, and local committees encourage people to plant potatoes, beans, cabbages, carrots, onions, and anything else that might help a household depend a little less on ships crossing dangerous waters. The idea sounds simple from a poster. A cheerful person holds a spade, the soil behaves. Vegetables rise neatly as if they have been trained. Real gardens are less obedient. Soil can be heavy clay, thin dust, or packed with stones left by some earlier builder who apparently hated carrots. Seeds may fail, frost may arrive late, birds may inspect your efforts with interest. Slugs do not understand patriotic duty. You work anyway. The handle of the spade presses against your palm. Your back begins to complain in a language older than war. If you have a small garden, every patch must be judged. Flowers are not forbidden, but they may feel harder to justify when food is short. A rose bush can remain perhaps if it is loved enough, but the border beside it may now hold onions. Lawns, especially in middle-class homes, carry ideas about respectability, order, and leisure. Turning one into a vegetable plot changes the look of the house. It says beauty can wait. Dinner cannot. For some families, especially those with allotments, the work is already familiar. For others, the sudden arrival of seed packets, compost advice, and fork technique is a new education. You learn about spacing, thinning, watering, earthing up potatoes, protecting seedlings, and the strange satisfaction of seeing green shoots appear where there was recently nothing but hope and mud. Children may help, which can mean genuine help or a charming redistribution of soil into shoes. They learn that food does not begin in a shop. It begins as small things placed in the ground, then watched, defended, and occasionally mourned. The garden changes the rhythm of the household. Morning may include checking for pests. Evening may include watering. Weekends may disappear into weeding, which has the remarkable habit of looking unfinished 5 minutes after being completed. Compost heaps gain importance. Vegetable peelings, garden waste, and anything suitable are saved and turned into future fertility. Even ash, manure, and leaf mould may enter conversations once reserved for weather and relatives. If you share an allotment site, you also share advice, tools, gossip, and the quiet competition of whose cabbages look least personally offended by the season. Growing food also brings a small sense of control. The war is enormous, distant, and mostly beyond your reach. You cannot guide convoys, repair bomb damage across the country, or decide where troops are sent, but you can plant beans, you can cover young cabbage, you can pull carrots from soil you worked yourself. That does not make life easy, but it gives the hands something useful to do. There are disappointments. A row of seeds may vanish. A neighbour's garden may flourish while yours looks as though it has chosen a more reflective life. You may discover that one vegetable grows well only after you have planted too little of it, while another arrives in such quantity that the family begins greeting it with caution. Courgettes, when successful, have never been shy. Still, every harvest matters. A basket of potatoes means fewer bought ones. A handful of beans brightens a rationed plate. Fresh greens help nutrition. Herbs can lift plain soup. A tomato, if it ripens, can feel like a small red festival. You stand back at dusk and look over the plot, listening to the soft scrape of a neighbour's fork beyond the fence. It is not the neat garden you had before. Paths are rough, gloves are dirty. There is mud on the back step and a seed catalogue on the table. Yet there is life here, practical and stubborn. The garden no longer exists to impress passers-by. It exists to feed the household, or at least to make a serious attempt. Tomorrow you will weed again, because the enemy may be abroad, but the dandelion has remained deeply local. You pour milk into a child's cup first and leave your own tea waiting. Wartime food policy often gives special attention to babies, children, expectant mothers, and people with medical needs because hunger does not visit every body in the same way. Priority milk, dried milk, vitamin products, and welfare foods become part of family routine. These schemes can protect health, but they also add collection times, paperwork, and another set of small decisions. You put the bottle back carefully and watch the child drink. Adults can manage with less. People say this calmly, as though parents have not been making that calculation for centuries. The milk is cool against the cup, pale and precious, and you pour it with the caution of someone handling both breakfast and growth. A child does not need speeches about nutrition. A child needs bones, teeth, energy, warmth, and the right to complain about bedtime with enough strength to make the complaint convincing. During the war, British authorities understand that rationing cannot treat every person as the same kind of stomach. Children, pregnant women, nursing mothers, and certain invalids may receive extra or priority access to foods such as milk, eggs, orange juice, cod liver oil, or vitamin supplements, depending on age, need, supply, and scheme. The point is practical rather than sentimental. A country at war still needs children to grow, mothers to recover, workers to remain able, and illness not to deepen because the cupboard has become too thin. You know this. You also know that knowing it does not make the pouring easier. The bottle must last until the next delivery or collection. Milk can sour if the weather is warm and the cool corner of the house is not cool enough. It can be knocked over by a child, a cat, or an adult moving too quickly while thinking about 3 other things. Spilled milk has always been annoying. In wartime, it becomes a small tragedy with a wet edge. You pour less into your tea and more into the cup on the table. This is not heroism in any grand public sense. It is the daily mathematics of care. Adults often make these choices silently because saying them aloud would make breakfast heavier. The child drinks, perhaps leaving a white line above the lip. You wipe it away with a cloth and pretend not to notice how closely you were watching. Milk matters because so many other foods are narrowed. It brings protein, fat, calcium, and vitamins, all of them plain words until a body lacks them. Government welfare schemes and nutritional advice try to direct scarce resources toward those most vulnerable. Clinics, schools, welfare centres, and distribution points become part of the food map. A mother may have to queue or collect, fill in forms, remember days, carry bottles, protect powder from damp, and fit all this around cooking, laundry, blackout routines, paid work, and the ordinary talent of not losing patience before noon. Help often arrives with effort attached. You may be grateful for dried milk and still tired from fetching it. You may value cod liver oil and still understand why a child views the spoon as a personal betrayal. Orange juice concentrate, when available for young children, brings brightness and vitamins. It also arrives through systems that must be understood and followed. Nothing just appears. Someone must know the rule, reach the place, keep the container clean, and persuade the child. In many homes, that someone is you. The kitchen table becomes a small distribution centre. 1 cup for the youngest, a little for the older child, a splash for tea if possible. Maybe milk in a pudding if the allowance permits it, and if the pudding is required to keep spirits from lying down completely. You learn to use milk where it matters most. A white sauce can make vegetables feel fuller. Porridge can feed children before school. A milk pudding can become nursery comfort in a world that has misplaced many comforts. If milk is short, you thicken with oats, bread, or potato. You sweeten lightly when sugar allows. You serve warm bowls and hope warmth does some of the work. There are differences between families. Rural households close to farms may manage differently from city families depending on deliveries. Money, health, family size, and local supply all matter. Rationing and priority schemes aim for fairness, but lived fairness still depends on place, knowledge, and time. You may know a neighbour whose child has extra needs. You may share a little advice, or a little milk if you can. These quiet exchanges rarely appear in grand wartime stories, but they help keep children fed. You lift your own cup at last. The tea is paler than you like, but warm. Across the table, the child has finished and is already distracted by a crumb, a toy, or some urgent business known only to children and possibly furniture. You collect the cup and set it near the sink. The bottle has less in it now. That is how it should be, though it still gives you pause. In war, love often looks like absence on your own plate. You put the bottle back in the coolest place and close the cupboard carefully. The child got the milk, your tea got a suggestion. Both of you will continue, though only one of you is expected to grow taller. The dining hall smells of boiled vegetables, gravy, damp coats, and the particular seriousness of adults determined to improve children. Wartime and post-war school meals become an important way to support nutrition when home supplies are stretched. There may be stew, potatoes, greens, pudding, milk, or a spoonful of something medically sensible and emotionally unpopular. The food is meant to help, and often it does. Children, however, have their own committee of the mouth, and it rarely meets with the Ministry of Food. You sit at the long table and look at the plate. A teacher waits nearby. National Health has become very interested in whether you finish your cabbage. The tables are set in rows, and the noise rises gently around you. Chairs scraping, spoons tapping, children whispering, someone being told not to flick anything that began life as a pea. The room is not elegant, but it is warm, supervised, and full of food that has been planned with more attention than many children suspect. School meals are not invented by the war, but wartime pressure gives them new importance. When household diets are limited by rationing, income, cues, and parental time, a meal at school can become a serious support. It helps protect children who might otherwise get too little hot food, too little milk, or too few vegetables. It also gives officials another way to turn nutritional advice into actual plates. That sounds sensible. It is sensible. It also means you, as a child at the table, may find yourself facing cabbage in the national interest. The spoon becomes a small test of citizenship. A teacher walks between tables with the calm persistence of someone who has chosen not to hear the word horrible unless it is supported by medical evidence. You look at the stew. It is thick, brown, and possibly kinder than it appears. There may be potatoes softened at the edges, carrots cut into uneven rounds, and a piece of meat that has travelled through the pot in a modest but meaningful way. The greens have been boiled with the confidence of an age that has not yet learned to apologise to vegetables. Pudding may follow, and this knowledge keeps many children involved in the first course. Milk may be served too, part of broader concern for children's growth and health. In some places, school milk and meals become woven into the day, helping families whose own cupboards are under strain. For a parent, this can be a relief. One hot meal taken care of elsewhere is not a small thing. It means the child has eaten something warm. It means the evening meal can stretch slightly further. It means less worry, though not no worry, because parents are skilled at finding the remaining portion. The child's view may be less grateful. Children do not usually experience public health as comfort. They experience it as a spoon approaching. The meal carries class differences too. For some children, a school dinner may be better or more regular than food at home. For others, it may feel plain, strange, or embarrassing. Table manners, accents, clothing, and appetite all sit together in the same room, not always gently. A child who eats quickly may be noticed. A child who leaves food may be scolded. A child who has never had a certain dish before may become the focus of helpful adult attention, which is rarely helpful at close range. Yet the system matters. Wartime Britain places growing emphasis on feeding children because the state has learned that health cannot be left entirely to private kitchens during a national emergency. A body that is still growing needs more than patriotic speeches and toast. It needs protein, milk, vitamins, and food that arrives even when the grocer disappoints the household. You lift the fork. The cabbage is still there, arranged in a small green hill of expectation. The teacher notices. You take a bite, partly because you are hungry and partly because the adult world has joined forces around the plate. It is not as bad as feared. It is not as good as pudding. This is a common wartime middle ground. Around you, children develop tactics. Some mix vegetables into potato. Some eat the worst thing first. Some attempt slow concealment beneath gravy. One boy tries to look invisible, which is difficult while sitting directly in front of a plate of greens. The adults have tactics too. They praise strong bones. They mention growing. They remind everyone that food must not be wasted. They know, better than the children do, that the meal is doing important work. A school dinner can stand between a child and hunger, between a tired mother and one more pot, between a limited ration and a growing body. It is ordinary, noisy, and practical. It smells of boiled cabbage because history does not always express care attractively. At the end, plates are scraped and stacked. Pudding arrives if fortune and the menu allow. Custard may pour over something pale and sweet, instantly improving the mood of the entire table. You finish what remains and sit back, warm and slightly defeated by nutrition. Outside, the war continues with all its machinery and weather and headlines. Inside, a teacher has successfully moved cabbage from plate to child, which may not win medals, but probably deserves a quiet line in the records. The sweet tin is not hidden exactly, but everyone knows it has been placed beyond casual reach. Sugar rationing changes tea, baking, jam making, birthdays, Christmas, and the small rewards that help a household remain pleasant under strain. A cake now requires planning. A spoonful of sugar must justify itself. Children remember sweets with the accuracy of trained witnesses, though they are less reliable when asked who left crumbs under the table. You scrape the last grains from the paper into a bowl and tap the packet twice. Nothing is wasted. Even the spoon seems to understand that sweetness has become an event. The tin sits on the highest shelf, behind a jar and beside a packet that has been folded down so carefully it looks smaller each time you see it. You do not lock it, because that would be dramatic, and wartime already supplies enough drama without involving humbugs. Still, everyone knows the rules. Sweets are rationed, sugar is rationed, jam is limited. Chocolate, boiled sweets, toffees, and little treats that once softened an afternoon now require patience, coupons, timing, and sometimes a level of restraint not naturally found in children. The child knows there are sweets somewhere. The adult knows there are not enough sweets anywhere. This is the beginning of many quiet negotiations. Sugar is one of the first foods rationed in Britain, and its absence spreads across the whole day. Tea changes, puddings shrink, cakes become rarer and plainer. Jam making must wait for preserving sugar or a careful saving of allowances. Marmalade, biscuits, custards, sauces, and birthday treats all feel the pinch. You begin to notice how often sweetness once appeared without being announced. A spoon in tea, a little jam on bread, a cake for visitors, a pudding after Sunday dinner. A sweet slipped into a child's hand to reward bravery, silence, or the difficult act of not poking a sibling during an air raid. Now every sweet thing carries a calendar. You save for birthdays. You save for Christmas. You save because a small cake at the right moment can do more for morale than a speech delivered at the wrong one. Baking becomes a planning exercise. You measure sugar with care, then scrape the packet as if the paper may reveal a secret compartment. Recipes adapt. Carrots may lend sweetness. Dried fruit, when available, helps. Syrup, honey, or jam may stand in if you have them, though each has its own shortage story. Eggless cakes, low-sugar puddings, and fruit-based dishes appear with brave names and mixed results. Some are genuinely good, others are edible with custard and loyalty. You stir the bowl and listen to the grains disappear against the spoon. There is a small sadness in watching sugar vanish, because it does not merely feed, it celebrates, it marks kindness. It gives children something simple to look forward to when so much else has become adult, official, and grey. Sweets are especially powerful because they are small enough to hold in a hand, and bright enough to feel like a private holiday. A child may spend a sweet coupon with great seriousness, weighing sherbet, toffee, barley, sugar, or chocolate as if making a property decision. Shop windows can become lessons in longing. The sweets may be visible, or half visible, or rumoured, which is sometimes worse. You may see children compare their choices, save one for later, or eat it at once because later is a fragile promise in wartime. Adults are not immune. A square of chocolate can quiet a difficult mood. A spoonful of jam can make bread feel generous. A proper cake can gather the household around the table and make one evening look almost like before. That is why the sweet tin matters. It is not greed. It is a small reserve of cheer. You guard it because cheer also has to last. There is temptation, of course. Everyone knows that a tin makes a sound when opened. Everyone knows which chair gives access to the shelf. Everyone knows that mothers, fathers, grandparents, older siblings, and visiting cousins can all develop sudden interest in the upper cupboard. Trust is important in families, but so is placing the tin where short arms cannot conduct independent policy. When the time comes, you bring it down. The children straighten. The room notices. You open the lid and look inside at the remaining pieces. They are not many, but they have presence. One sweet each can change the air. The choosing may take longer than the eating. A child selects carefully, then holds the sweet in the mouth for as long as possible, stretching flavour the way adults stretch butter. For a few minutes, nobody discusses rationing. Nobody mentions the queue. Nobody asks whether the cake contains egg. The sweetness does its quiet work. Later, the tin returns to the shelf, lighter again. You fold the sugar packet tighter, set the spoon aside, and glance at the calendar. Another birthday is coming. You begin to count backwards from it, measuring the days not by hours, but by whether there can be icing. Wartime teaches many forms of economy, but perhaps the tenderest is this: learning how to make one small sweet last long enough to feel like kindness, and then pretending you were not watching the last bite quite so closely. The stale end of the loaf sits on the board, and you refuse to call it finished. Wartime cooking gives leftovers a second, third, and sometimes rather surprising career. Bread becomes toast, crumbs, pudding, stuffing, or thickener. Bones become stock. Vegetable water enters soup. A spoonful of mashed potato may join tomorrow's cakes. The skill is not only thrift, but imagination under pressure. You begin to see future meals inside scraps that peacetime might have sent away without ceremony. The bread falls into dry crumbs beneath the grater. Yesterday has not retired. It has changed departments. You hold the hard crust in your hand and feel its dry edge against your thumb. It is no longer pleasant bread, not in the soft, fresh way that makes butter spread easily and children stop asking questions for half a minute. Yet it is still food, and wartime has made that distinction sharp. Before anything leaves the kitchen, it must explain why it cannot be useful again. Stale bread can become crumbs for rissoles, stuffing if the right meal appears, a thickener for soup, a base for pudding, or toast strong enough to support dripping without complaint. If the loaf is too dry to slice neatly, it can be grated. If it is too hard for sandwiches, it can soften under milk, stock, or gravy. Waste is no longer a private habit. It feels almost public, even when performed beside the sink. The Ministry of Food encourages saving scraps, using leftovers, and planning meals so that each ingredient serves more than once. This advice is practical, but it also changes the way you look at the table. A bone is not finished, it is stock waiting for water. A spoonful of boiled vegetables is not an embarrassment. It is tomorrow's soup making a small early appearance. Potato peelings may belong to compost if they cannot be eaten. Bacon rind can flavour a pan. Dripping has a second life. Even the water used for cooking vegetables may carry enough flavour and minerals to deserve a place in broth. You begin to cook with memory. Monday's dinner leaves Tuesday's flavour. Sunday's roast, if there was one, sends a message into Wednesday through stock. A crust from breakfast strengthens supper. This is economy, yes, but it is also continuity. The household learns to keep meals speaking to one another across the week. You scrape crumbs into a bowl and try not to lose any to the table. They may coat fish cakes, stretch mince, thicken a sauce, or give a pudding enough body to stand up to the spoon. Bread pudding is especially useful because it can take stale bread, a little dried fruit if fortune is in a generous mood, some spice, milk or water, and enough sweetness to make the whole thing seem intended rather than rescued. Many wartime dishes depend on this dignity of presentation. Leftovers must not look like leftovers if morale can help it. They are renamed, reshaped, browned, covered, sliced, or served with gravy. A family may accept repetition, but it is easier when yesterday returns wearing a different hat. Children are skilled at detecting suspicious familiarity. They know when a carrot has been seen before. They may not know exactly how much of Tuesday's mash has entered Wednesday's cakes, but they can sense that something has been rearranged. You become careful. You add onion if possible. You brown the outside. You call it savoury. The word savoury performs brave service in wartime kitchens. It suggests flavour even when the ingredient list is looking tired. There is labour hidden in all this saving. It is not only a matter of being sensible. Someone must remember what is left. Keep it safe, cool it properly, cover it from flies, reheat it well, and decide before it spoils. In houses without modern refrigerators, timing matters. A leftover can be useful, but it cannot linger forever in a warm room pretending to be future soup. You sniff, judge, scrape, stir, and decide. The kitchen becomes a place of constant small accounting. It is quiet work, repetitive and often unnoticed, but it protects the ration book from being emptied too quickly. It also protects pride. A meal made from leftovers can still be served with care. The table can still be laid. The plate can still be warm. A plain supper can still say that someone thought about you. That is the part official leaflets do not always capture. Saving food is not merely national duty, it is domestic tenderness with a practical face. You do not waste because ships are dangerous and coupons are limited, but also because children are hungry, neighbours may need help, and tomorrow will arrive whether the pantry is ready or not. The breadcrumbs settle in the bowl. You cover them with a cloth and place them aside. Later they may disappear into rissoles or pudding, doing work no fresh loaf would have expected of them. On the board only a few dry flakes remain. You brush them into your palm and add them too, because in this kitchen even crumbs have been asked to stay on staff. You wipe the board clean afterward, not because it is empty, but because it has given everything it had. That is how wartime kitchens measure success. Steam clouds the window while jars stand ready on the table. When fruit or vegetables arrive in season, the kitchen must act quickly, because winter has a long memory and very little sympathy. Bottling, pickling, drying and jam making turn a brief surplus into future meals. The work is hot, careful, and slightly tense. A bad seal wastes food. A good shelf of jars can make February look less severe from a distance. You lift one jar from the water and set it on a folded cloth. The glass clicks softly as it cools. For once, the pantry has something to say about the future. The kitchen is warm enough to make the wallpaper feel involved. A pan bubbles on the stove, jars wait in rows, and the smell of vinegar, fruit, sugar, steam, and hot metal settles into your clothes. Preserving is not a gentle little hobby in wartime. It is a race against ripeness, weather, storage, insects, and the clock. Fruit does not care that you are tired. Beans do not pause because the laundry is still damp. If the garden gives generously, or a neighbour offers a basket, or the market produces something worth carrying home, you must decide quickly what can be eaten now and what must be saved for colder months. The table becomes crowded with bowls, knives, cloths, bottles, lids, labels, and the kind of nervous attention usually reserved for infants and uncertain custard. Cleanliness matters. Heat matters. Seals matter. A jar that fails may spoil, and spoiled food in a shortage feels almost insulting. You wash the glass, prepare the rubber rings or covers, trim bruised spots, peel, slice, boil, strain, and wipe rims with the seriousness of someone sending fruit into winter with a passport. Jam making depends on sugar, which is rationed, so it cannot happen casually. Preserving sugar may be allowed at certain times, especially when fruit is ready but you still measure it with care. Too little sugar and the jam may not keep. Too much and you have spent sweetness the household may need elsewhere. The wooden spoon moves slowly through the pan. Plums, berries, apples, or whatever has arrived collapse into colour and scent, thickening as they cook. There is a moment when the room smells almost rich. It is not abundance exactly, but it is abundance remembered through steam. Pickling gives a different comfort. Onions, cabbage, beetroot, cucumbers, and other vegetables can be preserved in vinegar, bringing sharpness to meals that may otherwise lean heavily on potato and bread. A spoonful of pickle beside cold meat, if there is cold meat, can make the plate feel brighter. Even without meat, it can wake up bread and cheese, or give plain vegetables a bit of ceremony. Drying and storing matter too. Apples may be sliced, herbs may hang. Root vegetables need cool, dark places. Potatoes must be watched, onions want air. Everything has preferences now, and the pantry begins to resemble a boarding house for difficult guests. You learn these preferences because winter is not forgiving. A row of jars on a shelf is more than decoration. It is security you can see. It says that one wet afternoon in August has been turned into several small defences against February. The work is often shared. Women's Institute groups, neighbours, older relatives and local demonstrations spread methods and advice. Someone knows how long to boil. Someone else knows how to rescue a batch that refuses to set. A grandmother may arrive with an opinion about every jar in the house and be right just often enough to remain dangerous. Children can help by picking fruit, washing jars, or being moved away from the boiling pan after helping with too much enthusiasm. The room grows hotter. Your hair sticks at the temple. The floor becomes treacherous with drips. A spoon disappears under a cloth and is accused of desertion. Still, the work has rhythm. Fill, wipe, seal, lift, wait. Each jar is handled with care because each one contains time. Not only the time spent making it, but the time it will later save, the meal it will improve, the child it may cheer, the guest it may allow you to feed without shame. Wartime preserving has a quiet emotional weight. It lets you do something about a future you cannot control. You cannot know how long the war will last. You cannot know whether the next winter will be worse. You cannot know what ships will arrive or what shops will have, but you can put plums into jars, you can pickle onions, you can label a bottle and place it where your hand will find it in December. That is not certainty, but it is a kind of answer. When the jars cool, you listen for the signs of a seal. A little click can lift the heart more than seems reasonable. You wipe the glass and hold it to the light. The contents glow softly, red, gold, brown or green, depending on the season's gift. Later, the shelf will look back at you on a cold day, lined with proof that summer did not leave entirely. You set the newest jar among the others and stand for a moment in the warm, damp room. Your feet ache. Your apron is marked. The kitchen looks as though fruit has held a meeting and left in a hurry. But the pantry has gained a little courage, and for once February may have to make an appointment before frightening anyone. You enter a bright public room, where trestle tables, plain chairs and the smell of hot gravy replace the privacy of the family kitchen. British restaurants and other communal feeding centres offer inexpensive meals to workers, bombed-out families, and people whose cooking arrangements have become difficult. The food is simple, warm, and served without asking one tired person to perform every domestic miracle alone. Cutlery taps against plates. People talk over soup. Children swing their legs beneath the table. For a little while, feeding the family becomes a public service rather than a private test passed or failed beside the stove. The room has the cheerful plainness of a place built to be useful rather than admired. There may be notices on the wall, a serving counter, enamel jugs, trays, and staff moving steadily through the noise. The name British restaurant sounds grander than the furniture, but that is part of its charm. It is not a restaurant in the candlelit sense. It is a meal with its sleeves rolled up. These places grow from the need to feed people during wartime disruption, especially after bombing damages homes, kitchens, gas supplies, and ordinary routines. They also serve workers, shoppers, older people, and families who need an affordable hot meal when rations, time, fuel, or cooking space are limited. A private kitchen can be warm and comforting, but it can also become a lonely battlefield of pans, coupons, smoke, and tired decisions. Here, at least, someone else has chopped the vegetables. That alone may feel like a holiday of almost reckless luxury. You queue with a tray and watch the meal appear in stages. Soup first, perhaps thick with vegetables or barley. Then meat if available, or fish, or a stew that has taken its responsibilities seriously. Potatoes are likely. Greens arrive because health has followed you out of the house. Pudding may appear at the end, plain but welcome, especially if custard has been allowed to make the room kinder. The portions are not lavish, but they are planned to be nourishing and cheap. The point is not indulgence. The point is hot food made accessible, served at scale, and removed from the uncertainty of one household's cupboard. This matters more than it sounds. In a bombed area, someone may not have a working stove. A mother may be exhausted from queuing, childcare, war work, and night alarms. An older person may struggle to cook alone. A worker may need a midday meal that does not depend on a packed lunch made from a thin ration. British restaurants help answer those needs in a practical way, even if no one leaves saying the table linen was unforgettable. The atmosphere can be busy, almost cheerful. People who have lost windows, sleep, patience, or saucepans sit near people who simply came in because the price is low and the stew is hot. Conversation travels along the tables. Someone recognizes a neighbour. Someone complains softly about cabbage. Someone else defends the pudding, perhaps because pudding should always have counsel. Children compare portions. Adults eat with the steady focus of people who know a hot meal is not to be treated casually. There is dignity in the arrangement. The meal is not charity in the old shameful sense, or at least it tries not to feel that way. It is part of the home front's shared machinery, a civic kitchen for a country being asked to endure. You sit with your tray and feel the small relief of not having cooked it yourself. That relief is not selfish. Domestic work in wartime can be relentless. Every meal at home requires planning around coupons, queues, leftovers, fuel, and supply. A communal meal gives back an hour, maybe more. It also gives company. Eating in public changes the feeling of shortage. At home, a thin stew may feel like personal failure, even when the failure belongs to submarines, weather, policy, and distance. Here, everyone's plate looks roughly the same. The shared plainness removes some of the sting. Nobody has to pretend their household alone has mastered the art of turning half an onion into optimism. The food is warm, the gravy is doing its best. The room smells of steam, coats, and boiled vegetables, with enough human noise to keep loneliness from sitting down too heavily. There are limits, of course. Communal feeding does not replace home. It cannot give the privacy of your own table, the familiar chipped plate, the child's usual chair, or the quiet pleasure of serving something made by your own hand. It can be crowded. It can be plain. It can be another queue in a life already rich in queues, but it can also be a mercy. You finish the last spoonful and sit for a moment before standing. Around you, trays are lifted, tables wiped, and the next people take their places. The operation continues with quiet efficiency. Outside, the war is still asking kitchens to perform miracles with limited supplies. Inside, one room is answered by making supper everybody's problem for once, which may be the most comforting sentence any tired cook hears all week. You carry the empty tray back, lighter in every sense, and think that the meal was not fancy. It was better than fancy. It was finished. The siren begins just as the pan is coming to the boil, which is exactly the sort of timing war seems to enjoy. You turn off the heat, cover what can be saved, and gather sandwiches, a flask, or whatever will travel without becoming tragic inside a blanket. Meals during air raids are interrupted, portable, and eaten wherever safety allows, beneath stairs, in garden shelters, or in crowded public spaces. Adults listen for aircraft. Children ask whether there is anything else to eat. Someone has brought a hard-boiled egg with more presents than expected. Fear may fill the shelter, but supper still requires distribution. The sound of the siren moves through the house and changes every object at once. The kettle is no longer simply a kettle. It is something that must be taken off the heat. The stew is no longer supper. It is a question with a lid on it. The loaf becomes useful because bread can travel. You reach for what can be carried quickly. Sandwiches wrapped in paper, a bottle of milk if the children need it, a flask of tea, perhaps a tin, perhaps biscuits saved for precisely this kind of miserable convenience. The blackout is already in place, the room dimmed and careful, but now the house begins the familiar movement toward shelter. In some homes, that means an Anderson shelter in the garden, damp, cold, and not especially persuasive in bad weather. In others, it may mean a Morrison shelter indoors, a cellar, the space beneath stairs, or a public shelter shared with neighbours and strangers who soon know more about your family supper than they expected. You gather coats, blankets, gas masks earlier in the war, and whatever food can be managed without turning safety into a picnic with paperwork. Food in a shelter has to be practical. It must not spill too easily. It must not require knives, hot plates, or a mood of ceremony. Sandwiches, bread, cheese if available, hard-boiled eggs, apples, flasks of tea, and small tins all become useful. A hard-boiled egg travels well, though it does announce itself in close quarters with regrettable confidence. You place the bundle near the door and call the children. One wants a toy. One wants to know whether the pudding is coming. You answer the second question with more restraint than the situation deserves. The pudding will wait, if it can. Some puddings have been through less than this and failed. Outside, feet move along the path. A neighbour's gate clicks. The siren continues, rising and falling, that long public sound that makes private rooms feel suddenly temporary. In the shelter, the air is cooler and smells of damp earth, wool, metal, candle wax, and people trying to be calm. You settle the children, open the wrapped food, and pour tea into cups or enamel mugs. Adults listen between sentences. They learn to speak around fear, leaving space for engines, guns, distant explosions, or the all-clear that may take a long time. Children continue being children, which is both exhausting and useful. They ask for food, they wriggle, they complain about cold feet, they make hunger ordinary again by putting it into words. You hand out sandwiches. The bread may be dry, but dryness has advantages when the floor is damp and the lighting is uncertain. Someone offers a sweet. Someone else shares a biscuit. In public shelters, small acts of sharing can soften the edges of a frightening night. So can humour, though it must keep its voice low. A person who has carried tea becomes briefly important. A person who remembered cups becomes almost strategic. A person who brought a hard-boiled egg becomes known, whether that was the intention or not. The meal is not restful, but it provides rhythm. Bite, listen, sip, adjust the blanket, answer the child, wait. Air raids interrupt cooking in ways that can waste food if you are unlucky. A pan left too long may spoil, milk may sit out, bread may dry. The meal planned for the table may become tomorrow's problem. You cannot always choose. Safety comes first, but the cook still thinks of the covered pot cooling at home because nothing in wartime can be abandoned without a small mental inventory. When the all-clear finally comes, the return is slow. You climb out stiff, carrying cups, wrappers, sleepy children, and whatever remains of the supper bundle. The house may be intact, it may be dusty. The kitchen may smell faintly of the meal that was interrupted hours ago. You lift the lid from the pan and inspect the contents with the seriousness of a nurse examining a patient. If it can be reheated, it will be reheated. If it can be turned into something tomorrow, it will be assigned a new role. Nobody wastes food merely because the Luftwaffe has been inconsiderate about timing. You put the kettle on again if fuel and nerves allow. The children are half asleep. The adults are pretending not to be shaken. A sandwich eaten under a blanket in a shelter is not the supper anyone planned, but it fed the family when the table had to be left behind. That is the quiet fact beneath the fear. Even when the sky is dangerous, someone still counts cups, wraps bread, saves the pan, and makes sure the smallest hands receive something first. War may interrupt dinner, but it does not relieve you of clearing up afterward, which feels unfair and completely believable. You arrive in the countryside with a label on your coat and a ration book that has travelled farther than you wanted to go. Millions of children and some mothers are evacuated from towns and cities, placing them in homes where meals, manners, accents, smells, and expectations may feel unfamiliar. A child used to one kind of bread may reject another. A host may be startled by habits that were ordinary somewhere else. Food becomes part of homesickness, class difference, kindness, and embarrassment. You sit at the table and wait while stew is ladled into a bowl. It may taste strange. It may also be the first warm welcome of the day. The kitchen is not your kitchen. That is the first fact before any food reaches the plate. The table is the wrong height. The chairs creak differently. The fire smells of another family's coal. And the clock ticks with a confidence that does not care how far you are from home. Your suitcase is somewhere near the door. Your gas mask box has bumped against your hip all day. The label on your coat gives your name, but not the whole story. Not the street you left, not the mother trying to smile at the station, not the bedroom that may or may not be there when you return. Evacuation in Britain begins on a large scale at the start of the war, as children and vulnerable civilians are moved from cities and likely bombing targets to rural districts thought to be safer. The practical goal is protection. The emotional reality is far messier. A safer place can still feel frightening when it belongs to strangers. Food is one of the first ways that difference becomes visible. The host family may serve thick slices of bread unlike the bread at home, porridge made differently, vegetables you dislike, milk with a farm taste, or meat cooked in a way that seems to belong to another country, even though you have only crossed counties. Rural homes may have garden produce, eggs, or milk that city children find surprising. Some evacuees arrive thin, tired, underfed, or unfamiliar with certain foods. Some hosts are kind and patient. Some are strict. Some are overwhelmed by children they did not raise and habits they do not understand. At the table, all of this becomes very quiet. You lift a spoon because someone is watching. The stew may be rich with vegetables from the garden. It may smell strong, earthy, and unfamiliar. You may miss the thinner soup from home simply because it is yours. Homesickness has no respect for nutrition. Adults may not understand this. They see a child refusing good food and think of waste, ingratitude, or fuss. The child may be thinking of a mother's pan, a familiar cup, the sound of traffic beyond the window, or the way tea was poured in a kitchen now miles away. A meal can be nourishing and still hurt. The ration book travels with you because food allowances must follow the person, not merely the household left behind. That sounds tidy. In practice, it means more adjustment for everyone. The host must feed another mouth. The child must learn another table. The government can move paper more easily than appetite. You may be expected to eat what is given, use unfamiliar manners, finish your plate, say thank you clearly, and not cry into the cabbage, which is a high standard for someone who has been separated from home by train. Some evacuees find real warmth. They gain fresh air, regular meals, and affection from hosts who become almost family. A countryside kitchen can offer milk, eggs, garden vegetables, and quiet nights without sirens. A child may learn to collect eggs, dig potatoes, feed hens, or carry water. Food can become a bridge. The first accepted slice of bread, the shared pudding, the treat saved for after chores, the host who quietly remembers what the child likes, these things matter. Other experiences are harder. Some children feel unwanted, mocked for their accents, judged for their clothes, or shamed for manners that reflect poverty rather than character. The dinner table can reveal class differences sharply. You sit carefully, trying to read the room before the meal cools. The adults speak above you about school, chores, letters, and whether your mother has sent news. You keep eating because the stew is warm and because refusing it would make the room harder. The taste begins to settle. Perhaps it is not home, but it is not unkind. A piece of bread appears beside the bowl. Someone pushes the butter or margarine nearer without comment. That small movement can be more comforting than a speech. It says you are seen but not examined. Later, when you help clear the table, you may learn where cups belong, where scraps go, where the peelings are saved, and how this house stretches its own rations. Wartime makes every household inventive, but no two households are inventive in exactly the same way. You will carry some habits back with you. You may also keep resisting others on principle, especially if they involve overcooked greens. For now, the bowl is empty. The strange kitchen is still strange, but it has fed you. That does not erase the station, the label, or the ache of missing home. It only gives the day a softer ending. Sometimes survival begins not with courage, but with accepting stew from someone who has not yet learned how you like your bread. The grocery store is brighter than many wartime shops across the ocean, but the small ration book in your hand still has authority. In the United States, families learn to manage ration stamps and point systems for foods such as sugar, coffee, meat, fats, and processed goods. Money is not enough if the right stamp is missing. A shelf may hold cans you can see but cannot buy without surrendering the proper points. You stand beside the cart and compare what the family wants with what the book allows. It is not starvation for most households, but it is still arithmetic with dinner attached. The aisles smell of cardboard boxes, floor wax, coffee that may not be available today, and the faint metal scent of cans stacked in tidy rows. Compared with bombed cities or occupied villages, the American shop can look almost abundant, which is why the ration book feels a little strange in your hand. There is food here. There are labels, prices, counters, and clerks. There may even be choice. But choice now has conditions. The Office of Price Administration issues ration books and sets up systems meant to control demand, prevent hoarding, manage shortages, and keep prices from climbing beyond ordinary reach. Sugar is rationed early. Coffee follows for a time. Meat, butter, cheese, fats, and canned or processed foods come under point systems that make shopping feel like a quiet examination. The red points usually belong to meats and fats. The blue points belong to processed foods such as canned fruit, canned vegetables, and soups. You do not simply ask whether you can afford a tin. You ask whether you can afford the tin, spare the points, and defend the choice to Thursday's supper. A can of peaches may sit in front of you with its bright label facing out, looking cheerful in a way that feels almost rude. It is there. You can touch it. You can read the price. But if the point cost is too high, the can might as well be sitting behind a velvet rope, enjoying itself. You turn it over and put it back. The cart remains partly empty, not from hunger exactly, but from calculation. American families, especially those with steady incomes and access to shops, often have more food than many civilians in Europe. That matters and should not be blurred. Yet the war still changes the American kitchen. Military supply needs are enormous. Food is shipped to allied nations. Tin, rubber, fuel and transport are under pressure. Factories and farms adjust to wartime labour and production demands. People are told not to waste, not to hoard, and not to complain too loudly when dinner loses some of its old confidence. You look at the meat counter and think in red points. A roast may consume too many. Ground meat may stretch farther. Liver may offer more value if the family can be persuaded to greet it politely. Bacon has charm, but charm is expensive. Butter must compete with margarine, cooking fat, and what the week requires. Coffee, when rationed, becomes a morning matter of national patience. People stretch it, brew it carefully, or discuss it with the gravity of those who believe civilization begins after the first cup. The clerk weighs, stamps, checks, and totals. The system depends on millions of ordinary people learning a new language of stamps, dates, values, and categories. You keep the ration book dry and safe. Children may be given a small lesson in why a visible sweet or can does not automatically become theirs. Adults learn to plan menus around points, not just appetite. Cookbooks and magazines offer advice for point-saving meals, meatless suppers, stretching fats, using seasonal produce, and choosing fresh foods that may not require the same coupons as processed items. Fresh vegetables and fruits can be easier to manage when available, especially if local supply is good. This helps explain the patriotic enthusiasm for gardens, canning, and buying wisely. The household pantry begins to reflect strategy. A high-point can is saved for company, illness, a celebration, or a night when everyone is too tired to negotiate with dried beans. You may trade planning tips with neighbours, compare which stores had what, or listen to radio messages encouraging discipline. The tone is cheerful, but the message is firm. Civilian appetite must fit inside a war economy. There are irritations. A stamp may expire, a value may change, a child may suddenly announce a desire for the exact item you did not buy because it cost too many points. You explain. The child finds the explanation less nourishing than the peaches. Still, the system gives many families a sense of shared participation. Saving points, planting gardens, using leftovers, and accepting limits all become ways to support soldiers and allies from the kitchen table. That does not make the arithmetic more charming, but it gives it a reason. You choose potatoes, carrots, beans, a smaller cut of meat, and perhaps one can that feels worth the sacrifice. At the checkout, money and stamps both leave your hand. The bags are heavier than British ones might be, yet lighter than peacetime expectation. You carry them home through a country that is not starving, but is learning that abundance can also be scheduled, counted, and told to wait until next week. You kneel in a backyard where part of the lawn has been turned into rows of beans, tomatoes, carrots, or lettuce. American victory gardens appear beside homes, schools, factories, and public buildings, encouraged as a way to support civilian supply and morale. A family that has never treated soil as a serious colleague now studies seed packets, compost, watering, weeds, and insects with patriotic concern. Harvest brings canning jars, hot kitchens, and shelves that look reassuringly busy. You pull one small carrot from the ground and brush away the dirt. It is not much, but it is yours, and it has avoided the point system entirely. The earth is warm under your knees, and the smell of tomato leaves clings to your fingers after you brush against the plants. Behind the garage, the neat idea of a lawn has been interrupted by stakes, string, seed rows, and a watering can that now receives more attention than some relatives. Victory gardens are practical, but they are also emotional. They let people do something visible when the war itself feels too large for ordinary hands. You cannot steer a convoy, fly a bomber, or decide how much canned food the army needs, but you can keep beetles away from beans. This may not sound heroic until supper depends on the beans. Across the United States, families are urged to grow produce at home so commercial farms and processors can support troops and overseas needs. Government messages encourage gardening as patriotic work, and the result is a country where many families begin looking at vacant lots, backyards, and corners of public land with a new question. Can that become food? You push your fingers into the soil and loosen a weed before it becomes too ambitious. There is a learning curve. The poster version of gardening is tidy. Real gardening involves knees, blisters, weather, caterpillars, and the discovery that plants have preferences no one mentioned clearly enough. Tomatoes need staking. Lettuce bolts when heat arrives. Beans climb if they are given support and sulk if they are not. Carrots require patience and soil that does not contain stones arranged by nature, specifically to create comedy. Children may help by watering, picking, and asking whether anything is ready every 12 minutes. They may also step exactly where you told them not to, which proves that even patriotic agriculture must negotiate with childhood. Still, the garden changes the household. Fresh vegetables are valuable because rationing and point systems affect many processed foods, fats, meats, and sugar. A tomato from the yard does not ask for blue points. Lettuce does not require a stamp. Beans may be eaten fresh, shared with neighbours, or canned for later if the crop is good. The garden makes the dinner plate brighter and gives the cook room to breathe. It also teaches timing. Plant too early and frost may punish your optimism. Plant too late and summer may run out before the harvest arrives. Water too little and the leaves droop. Water too much and the soil becomes a private swamp. You learn to watch the weather as if it owes you money. At the same time, the garden brings pleasure. The first tomato reddening on the vine can improve a whole afternoon. A row of beans gives the household something to inspect after work. A child eating a pea straight from the pod may briefly understand agriculture as magic, before asking whether dessert is also growing somewhere nearby. When harvest comes, the kitchen changes again. Canning jars appear, and the comfortable dream of homegrown food turns into steam, heat, lids, and careful timing. Tomatoes are peeled and packed. Beans are snapped. Corn is cut. Fruit is preserved when available. The work can be hot and tiring, especially in late summer, but full shelves offer a deep reassurance. Each jar says that one good day in the garden will be remembered in winter. The garden also creates a neighbourhood economy of small kindnesses and mild competition. Someone has too many zucchini. Someone else has extra tomatoes. And a neighbour's cucumbers are thriving in a way that seems unnecessary. Recipes move across fences. Advice follows whether invited or not. A person who grew 3 successful cabbages may speak with the calm authority of a cabinet minister, though at least the cabbages are real. You trade a handful of beans for a jar lid or share a basket with a family whose crop failed. These exchanges matter. Wartime morale is not made only from speeches and flags. It is made from a neighbour handing over tomatoes, because hers ripened faster and she knows your children like them. There are limits. Not everyone has land, time, tools, or health for gardening. Apartment dwellers may depend on community plots or window boxes. Rural and suburban families often have more opportunity than people in crowded cities. But the victory garden remains one of the clearest ways food becomes part of civilian service. You stand and stretch your back, looking over the uneven rows. The garden is not perfect. A few plants have failed. The lettuce looks dramatic. The weeds have misunderstood surrender. Yet the basket beside you holds carrots, beans, and tomatoes. Tonight, dinner will include something not bought, not stamped, not counted by points, and not approved by anyone behind a counter. It came from dirt, weather, labour, and stubbornness. You carry it inside with the quiet pride of someone who has discovered that a backyard can argue with a ration book and occasionally win. You carry a tray through a noisy mess hall inside a Japanese-American incarceration camp. Families removed from their homes during the war often lose the privacy of eating around their own tables, with meals shaped by institutional supply, limited budgets, and kitchens that may not fit familiar cooking habits. Children sit with friends. Parents sit nearby, watching family routines loosen in a room built for efficiency rather than tenderness. Some people garden or work in camp agriculture to improve what is available, but the deeper loss is harder to place on a plate. You sit down with your tray. The meal is food, but the table is not home. The room is full of movement, trays sliding, benches scraping, voices crossing one another, children calling to friends, adults looking for a place where the family can sit together, if together is still possible in a hall designed for lines. The food may be hot, but it arrives through a system that has already taken too much. After the attack on Pearl Harbor and the forced removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast, families are sent to camps in remote places, often after leaving homes, farms, shops, schools, kitchens, and familiar neighbourhoods with little time to prepare. The loss is not only property, though property matters deeply, it is also the loss of ordinary control. At home, a family meal has its own order. Who cooks, who sets the table, who sits where, what is eaten on cold days, how rice is prepared, how leftovers are used, which bowl belongs to whom, which child complains before eating anyway. In the mess hall, that private pattern is interrupted. You stand in line instead. You receive what is served. You carry a tray to a shared table. The meal is organised for efficiency, not memory. Budgets are limited. Ingredients are supplied in bulk, and the cooks must feed many people at once with what the administration provides. The result may not fit Japanese tastes, family habits, or the quiet rituals that once made meals feel like home. Rice may be poorly prepared or not central enough. Vegetables may be unfamiliar or badly handled. Meat may arrive in forms that do not suit the family's cooking style. Food can be bland, repetitive, or simply wrong, in the way food becomes wrong when it belongs to no one in particular. You sit with your tray and try to make a meal from it. Around you, generations are shifting. Children and teenagers begin eating with friends rather than parents. They linger in groups, laugh, move from table to table, and discover a social life shaped by the camp itself. Parents may watch this with unease. The dining room has become one more place where authority inside the family weakens, not because children have become unkind, but because the structure of daily life has been remade around institutions. A family that once gathered at home now meets in public for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Even conversation changes when it must happen under the noise of hundreds of other trays. Privacy becomes rare. The simple act of feeding a child, once done by a parent in a kitchen, is now partly handled by a line. This is not a small loss. Food is culture carried by the hand. It is seasoning, timing, texture, habit, memory, and respect. When those things are disrupted, hunger may still be answered, but belonging is not. Some people work to improve conditions. Camp gardens appear where soil, weather, and permission allow. Agricultural work produces vegetables. Families grow familiar foods if they can. Skilled cooks adapt what is available, and communities find ways to restore flavour, dignity, and comfort within harsh limits. People share, improvise, pickle, garden, trade, and teach. They do not stop being themselves because the government has misplaced justice. Still, the larger fact remains. These are American families imprisoned by their own country, eating institutional meals inside barbed wire boundaries. That cannot be softened into quaint wartime adjustment. You notice the dust outside, the weather pressing against thin walls, the long distances from the coastal homes many people knew. You notice older people eating quietly, perhaps missing a kitchen where the rice pot sat in the right place and the shelves held familiar bowls. You notice mothers who once judged portions by a child's appetite now receiving ladled servings like everyone else. You notice fathers carrying trays under the gaze of guards and rules. The meal may be ordinary in content, but the setting changes its meaning. A piece of bread can taste different when eaten in confinement. A bowl of stew can fill the stomach and still leave the person unsettled. Children adapt fastest, as children often do, which can be both a relief and a sadness. They make friends, invent routines, grow used to the hall, and sometimes prefer the freedom of sitting away from parents. Adults may understand why and still feel the family table slipping. That is the quiet wound here. Not every harm announces itself loudly. Some arrive 3 times a day with a tray. You finish the meal and stack the dishes where you are told. The room continues around you. Another line forms. Another serving begins. Outside, the camp wind lifts dust against the buildings, and inside, families keep doing the tender work of remaining families in a place that has made even dinner public. The food has done what food can do. It has not done what home used to do. You stand in an occupied French market with a ration card, a cloth bag, and no certainty that the printed allowance has any relationship with the counter. Transport is strained, supplies are seized or redirected, and legal shops may have little to sell. Families stretch bread, vegetables, soup, and whatever can be found through relatives, barter, rural trips, or the black market. Extra food may exist somewhere, but the price can be impossible and the risk real. You look at the empty place where butter should be. The card says you are allowed to buy it. The shelf has chosen a different interpretation. The market still has voices, footsteps, awnings, baskets, and the smell of damp stone after morning rain, but much of its old confidence has gone. Before the war, a market can be a place of argument and pleasure, where you choose, compare, complain about prices, and go home feeling that dinner has been assembled through skill. Under occupation, choice narrows. The German army requisitions food, transport is disrupted, farms face shortages of labour and equipment, and cities depend on supply systems that do not always work. Official rationing promises order, but promises do not fry onions. You move from stall to stall, asking quietly, studying faces, reading absence. Conversations lower themselves as they pass from bread to butter to the names of villages where someone might know someone with hens. There may be turnips, a few tired carrots, leeks, cabbage, or potatoes if you are fortunate. There may be bread of changing quality. Meat is scarce. Butter is scarcer still. Coffee, sugar, oil, and chocolate retreat into memory, rumour, or the private cupboards of people with money, connections, or rural relatives. The legal market carries the mood of people pretending not to look desperate. Everyone knows the rules. Everyone also knows the rules do not fill every plate. This is where the black market begins to matter. In French, it is the marché noir, a phrase that sounds almost elegant until you are the one paying too much for a little fat, because the children need something more than thin soup. Food outside official channels may come from farmers, traders, smugglers, hidden stocks, or theft from military supply. It may be good, it may be spoiled, it may be unaffordable. It may bring punishment if discovered. Yet when the legal ration is too small or too uncertain, moral lines become harder to draw neatly. A mother with money may buy eggs illegally and feel ashamed later. A worker without money may watch others do the same and feel anger sharper than hunger. Occupation does not distribute hardship evenly. City families often suffer more because they depend on official supply. Rural families may have access to gardens, animals, or direct barter, though they also face requisitions and surveillance. People travel to the countryside with clothing, linens, jewellery, or household goods to exchange for food. A good coat can become potatoes. A wedding sheet can become flour. This is not a romantic barter economy. It is a household slowly turning itself into meals. You carry a cloth bag because paper is scarce, and because anything might become useful if the chance appears. The bag is light now, which makes your arm feel foolish. You pause before a stall where a woman has a few onions and a face that says asking will not improve the quantity. Prices rise. Official prices may be controlled, but hidden prices follow fear. Some shopkeepers cheat. Some farmers hide food to protect their own families. Some people collaborate, some resist. Most simply navigate a day that keeps offering bad choices and calling them arrangements. You learn to cook around uncertainty. Bread is stretched with soup. Soup is stretched with water. Vegetables are sliced thin. Potato peelings are considered. A scrap of bacon, if found, can perfume a whole pot. A little oil becomes treasure. Coffee substitutes appear, as they do across much of Europe, bringing warmth without the old comfort. Children ask for food from before the war. Adults answer with stories, recipes, or silence. Hunger here is not always immediate collapse. Often it is slow narrowing. Smaller portions, fewer fats, less protein, more starch, weaker bodies, longer walks, sharper tempers, clothes exchanged for calories. Families measuring the distance to a farm against the strength needed to get there. Yet daily life continues. People still greet neighbours, sweep steps, mend clothes, queue, cook, and lay tables. The effort to remain ordinary becomes its own resistance to humiliation. You buy what you can, a few carrots perhaps, a loaf darker than you hoped, maybe a little cheese if luck, money, and timing have briefly cooperated. You do not ask too many questions. Questions can be dangerous, and answers may cost extra. On the way home, the bag knocks lightly against your leg. It is not enough, but it is not empty. That distinction matters. In the kitchen, you will turn the contents into soup, add bread, save every scrap, and tell the children there is supper. They may believe you because children want to believe the person holding the pan. You place the ration card back in its drawer. It says you are entitled to more than you received, but wartime paper has developed a habit of making promises the market cannot cook. The cup is dark, hot, and doing its best. In Germany and other wartime kitchens, real coffee may be scarce, so roasted barley, chicory, acorns, or other substitutes step forward with varying degrees of confidence. Ersatz foods have a long history, but war gives them a larger role at breakfast. Bread changes, fats shrink, meat becomes less frequent. Access to food also reflects power, privilege, and racial policy, with favoured groups receiving more while Jews, prisoners, forced labourers, and occupied peoples are deprived. You lift the cup and breathe in the bitter steam. Calling it coffee may be one of the evening's smaller acts of cooperation. The drink warms your hands, and that is its strongest argument. It does not have the deep smell of real coffee, the kind that once filled a kitchen and made the morning feel properly opened. This is a substitute, and no matter how neatly it is packaged, the mouth usually knows when it has been asked to participate in an illusion. Ersatz is not simply a wartime word, but wartime gives it a long working day. When imports shrink, blockades bite, and resources are redirected toward the military, households encounter replacements for foods that once seemed ordinary. Coffee may become roasted grain, chicory, acorn, or mixtures with only a distant acquaintance with the original bean. Tea may be stretched or replaced. Bread may include different flours or fillers. Fats become precious, meat grows less frequent, sugar thins out. The table does not empty in the same way everywhere, but it changes, and the changes arrive repeatedly, meal by meal, cup by cup. You take a sip. It is bitter enough to feel serious. Perhaps that is useful. In a cold kitchen, seriousness can be mistaken for strength. Families adapt because they must. They learn which substitutes are tolerable, which need milk that may not be available, and which should be swallowed while looking out of the window. A substitute can be nourishing, warming, and important without being convincing. People understand this. They still joke. They complain. They remember. They say it is almost coffee with the tone usually reserved for a cousin who has almost behaved. German food policy during the war is also tied to conquest and cruelty, not only domestic inconvenience. Nazi authorities seek to feed the German population and the military partly by drawing food from occupied territories. This worsens shortages elsewhere and makes hunger a weapon as well as a hardship. Rations are not only unequal by accident. Jews, prisoners of war, concentration camp prisoners, forced labourers, and many people under occupation face deliberate deprivation, exploitation, or starvation. That reality must sit beside any scene of a civilian kitchen. One family's substitute coffee may be a small disappointment. Another family, not far away in the same European war, may have almost nothing because policy has decided their hunger is useful or irrelevant. You hold both facts carefully. The kitchen cup is ordinary. The system around it is not innocent. For many German civilians, especially as the war grows longer, meals become narrower and more repetitive. Women, children, and older people manage coupons, queues, shortages, bombing, fuel problems, and rising exhaustion. City families may depend heavily on ration cards and shops. Rural households may have better access to certain foods, though they face demands, controls, and labour strain. People save fat, stretch bread, grow vegetables if they can, preserve fruit, and turn leftovers into the next meal, just as civilians do in many countries. The difference lies in the political structure shaping who is fed first and who is not meant to be fed enough at all. Food is never just food in this setting. It is policy placed on a plate. You set the cup down and prepare breakfast around what exists. Dark bread perhaps, margarine if available, a little jam, potatoes later, soup from bones if bones can be had. The flavour of substitute coffee becomes part of the morning's routine, like the blackout curtains, the news, the waiting, and the quiet calculation of what must last. Children may wrinkle their noses. Adults may insist it is fine. The word fine can carry a household for years if nobody tests it too harshly. Shops offer mixtures that promise strength, aroma, or good value. Labels may sound encouraging. The contents may require loyalty. But a hot drink still has meaning. It creates a pause. It warms fingers. It gives you something to serve when there is no real coffee to offer. In that limited sense, the substitute succeeds. It does not restore abundance. It does not erase fear. It does not make the breakfast table honest about the larger thefts that helped feed some people while starving others. Yet the cup sits there, steaming, part comfort and part compromise. You drink slowly because it is hot and because there is no reason to hurry disappointment. Later, perhaps, someone will say they hardly noticed the difference. This is unlikely, but kindness often takes the form of bad reviews politely withheld. The cup empties. A little dark grain remains at the bottom. You rinse it away and prepare to begin the day. The substitute has done its small duty. It has warmed the hands, filled the cup, and reminded everyone that almost coffee is still much easier to find than almost justice. You stand beside a pot that contains more water than food. In occupied Greece, requisitions, economic collapse, transport failure, and blockade help create devastating famine, especially in the winter of 1941 and 1942. Families sell clothing, furniture, and household objects for bread, oil, or anything that can quiet hunger. Soup kitchens become essential. City dwellers search the countryside while villages face demands on their own supplies. This is not a place for bright jokes. Hunger changes how people walk, speak, wait, and measure the day. You stir the pot once, though there is almost nothing to stir, because the children are watching. The sound of the spoon is small against the metal, too small for the room, and for a moment everyone listens as if the noise itself might become substance. It does not. The kitchen is bare in a way that feels different from ordinary poverty. Ordinary poverty has routines, humiliations, and tricks learned over time. This hunger has arrived with armies, requisitions, broken transport, rising prices, collapsed wages, and a market that no longer behaves like a market. In Athens and other cities, food becomes harder to find and harder to afford. Bread, oil, beans, vegetables, and grains slip beyond reach for many families. The official ration may be too small, too irregular, or too late. Money loses meaning when prices climb faster than a household can follow. People sell a coat, then a chair, then sheets, then jewellery, then tools, each object becoming a little flour, a little oil, a little bread. A home can shrink this way, not by walls moving inward, but by belongings leaving one at a time to keep bodies alive. You look around the room and see the spaces where things used to be. A blanket gone. A good pan gone. A tablecloth gone. The children may not know the history of every object, but they understand absence. Occupation makes food political and physical at once. Supplies are taken for military needs. Movement is restricted or dangerous. Farms cannot always deliver to cities. Fuel is scarce. Boats, roads, carts, and railways do not carry ordinary life as they once did. Rural areas may have food, but they are under pressure too, and many villages are not simply waiting with baskets for hungry city families. They have their own demands, losses, fear, and watchful authorities. Still, people walk. They leave cities with whatever can be traded, hoping to return with grain or potatoes. They move slowly, weakened by hunger before the journey even begins. They carry family valuables that have stopped being sentimental and started being edible in imagination. A ring might become flour. A coat might become oil. A pair of shoes might become beans, though giving up shoes when roads are long is a bitter bargain. Soup kitchens try to hold the line where private kitchens cannot. Charitable groups, local efforts, and later relief help many survive, but the need is enormous. You may stand in another queue, this time not for a comfort or a planned meal, but for a bowl that proves the day has not entirely abandoned you. The soup may be thin. It may contain pulses, grain, vegetables, or whatever can be gathered. It may not be enough. Yet a warm bowl can mean the difference between standing and not standing. Children learn the geography of hunger, where food is served, which door opens, which corner holds a market, which adult might share, which route to avoid. Adults learn to measure faces. Who is weaker today? Who should get the last spoonful? Who can pretend not to want it? You return to the pot and add what little there is. Perhaps a handful of greens, a piece of bread, a little flour, a few beans, or only salt if salt remains. The room waits without asking too loudly. In a better year, the smell of cooking might fill the kitchen and call everyone toward the table. Now the smell is faint. The children watch your hands, because hands doing something are easier to bear than hands resting helplessly. You keep moving for them. You stir. You scrape. You pour water slowly, making the liquid look more generous than it is. Hunger alters time. Morning is not morning, but the distance to food. Afternoon is not afternoon, but the question of whether anything can be found before dark. Sleep is lighter when the stomach is empty. Tempers grow thin. The body becomes careful with every step. People speak less because words also require strength. Yet dignity does not vanish. Families still wash bowls. Someone still covers the pot. A mother still wipes a child's mouth. A neighbour still shares a handful when sharing is possible. These small acts do not solve the famine, but they refuse to let famine define every human gesture. You serve the children first. The portions are too small to deserve the name, but you place each one down as gently as if it were enough. Nobody jokes. Nobody asks for more. The spoon returns to the pot and finds only water and a few traces of what was once supper. You stir it one last time, not because it will change, but because the children are watching and hope sometimes needs a sound. The bread card is folded inside your glove, close to your palm. During the siege of Leningrad, food deliveries are cut, warehouses burn, transport breaks down, and rations fall to levels that cannot sustain ordinary life. Bread is weighed with terrible care and stretched with substitutes when flour runs short. Families divide tiny portions, protect ration cards, carry water, search for fuel, and make choices no family should have to make. The cold deepens everything. You place the bread on the table and cut it into pieces that seem too small to cast a shadow. Nobody eats until every portion is equal. The room is so cold that breath seems to belong to someone else, appearing briefly and then disappearing into the dim air. Outside, the city is held in a ring of violence and winter. Inside, ordinary objects have become instruments of survival. A stove without fuel is not really a stove. A cupboard without food is not really a cupboard. A ration card, though only paper, is life folded into a rectangle. You keep it close because losing it may mean losing the next piece of bread. During the siege, which begins in 1941 and lasts into 1944, Leningrad becomes one of the most terrible civilian ordeals of the war. German forces surround and bombard the city, while Finnish forces hold positions to the north, cutting it off from normal supply. Food stocks are destroyed, deliveries become dangerous and inadequate, and the population is left to endure hunger, bombardment, disease, and extreme cold. The official bread ration changes over time, falling at its worst to amounts too small for human need. Workers, dependents, children, and others receive different allowances, but even the larger portions can fail the body. Bread itself is changed by scarcity. Flour is stretched with substitutes such as bran, cellulose, oilseed cake, or other materials used to make the ration go farther. The loaf may be dark, damp, heavy, and strange in the hand. Yet it is bread because it is called bread, because it is weighed as bread, and because people need it to be bread. You set the piece on the table and cut carefully. The knife makes almost no sound. Everyone watches, not with greed, but with attention sharpened past speech. A crumb matters, a larger corner matters. Fairness matters because hunger can make love feel like an accounting problem, and families work hard to prevent that. Someone receives a portion slightly larger because they must work. Someone else receives a softer part because they are ill. A child may be given more while an adult looks away. These decisions leave marks no one can see. You cannot make them gently enough. The cold is a second hunger. Fuel disappears. Furniture, books, doors, and anything burnable may be used for heat. Water must be carried, sometimes from holes cut in ice or from distant sources, up staircases in buildings where strength is already failing. The city's trams stop. Streets fill with snow, silence, and the effort of moving slowly. People wrap themselves in layers and still feel the cold enter the bones. A day may revolve around obtaining bread, finding water, searching for fuel, and conserving enough energy to do it again. The ordinary rhythm of meals is gone. There is no breakfast in the old sense, no comfortable lunch, no supper gathering everyone with steam and conversation. There are portions. There is waiting. There is the careful storing of a piece for later, even when the body wants it now. Some people boil wallpaper, paste, leather, or whatever can be made chewable. Some keep diaries, noting food, weather, death, and work in plain lines that carry more force than any speech. You stand beside the table and feel the silence around the bread. Outside, artillery may sound, but inside the sharper noise is the scrape of the knife and the small movement of hands. The city continues in ways almost impossible to understand from safety. Factories work. Hospitals function under strain. People clear snow, care for children, bury the dead, and hold on to routines when routines have almost no materials left. Music is played, books are read. Lessons continue when they can. These acts are not decorations placed over suffering. They are ways of remaining human while the body is being worn down. Food carries that same meaning. A piece of bread is not only calories, it is a promise that the day has not fully defeated the household. You pass the portions around. The child takes theirs with both hands. No one eats quickly. To eat too quickly would make the piece disappear before the mind has accepted it. Some people save a bite near the bed, a little future held against the dark. Others eat at once because the body refuses negotiation. There is no right way to be hungry at this level. There is only survival and the fragile kindness people can still offer inside it. You brush the crumbs from the table into your palm and place them in your mouth, not from greed, but because waste has become unthinkable. The bread card returns to your glove. It is only paper, soft from use, vulnerable to damp and theft and loss. Yet tomorrow it may become another piece weighed on a scale, another division at the table, another hour carried forward. In this kitchen, bread is not part of the meal. It is the meal standing alone, and even then it must be shared with mathematics watching quietly from every chair. You push a bicycle along a frozen Dutch road because riding it would require strength the day has not provided. During the winter of 1944 and 1945, the occupied Western Netherlands suffers a severe breakdown in food and fuel supplies. Urban families travel into the countryside to trade jewellery, clothing, linen or furniture for potatoes and grain. Sugar beets and tulip bulbs enter kitchens because hunger has narrowed the list of choices. The bulb on the board once belonged to spring. Now it is peeled, sliced and asked to become supper. No recipe can make that feel ordinary. The bicycle moves slowly beside you, its tyres dragging through ruts of ice and old mud. It may carry a suitcase, a sack, a blanket, or a small bundle of things that used to belong inside the house rather than on a road. A tablecloth becomes a possible meal, a silver spoon becomes potatoes. A pair of good shoes becomes flour if luck is kind and the farmer is willing. You walk because the city has become too thin to feed you, and the countryside, though suffering too, may still hold something that can be traded. The hunger winter follows a hard chain of events: occupation, transport disruption, fuel shortages, harsh weather, military decisions, and a breakdown in supply to the Western Netherlands. Cities such as Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, and Utrecht face severe hunger as food deliveries falter and fuel becomes scarce. The cold enters apartments where heating has failed. People burn furniture, floorboards, and anything that can give a little warmth. Trees disappear from streets. The household becomes smaller, not because rooms shrink, but because chairs, shelves, and doors may slowly become heat. You carry goods into the countryside because money may not be enough, and because official rations cannot fill the body. These journeys are often called hunger trips, and the name is plain because there is no need to decorate it. People walk or push bicycles for miles, weakened before they begin, hoping to exchange belongings for potatoes, grain, beans, or whatever a farm can spare. The road is not only cold, it is uncertain. There may be checkpoints, exhaustion, theft, disappointment, or the quiet humiliation of offering something precious and receiving too little in return. Farmers are not all the same. Some help generously, some sell at high prices, some have their own families and obligations. Hunger makes easy moral stories less easy. You keep walking, the bicycle leans against your hip. The sky is pale and low. At home, someone is waiting for you to return with food, and that waiting has weight. In the kitchen, recipes change beyond recognition. Sugar beets, normally not anyone's idea of a comforting family supper, are boiled, mashed, or worked into whatever dish can be managed. They can be coarse, watery, and stubbornly sweet in a way that does not feel like dessert. Tulip bulbs become another desperate food. They must be prepared carefully because not every bulb is safe, and even edible ones are harsh. They may be peeled, sliced, boiled, or ground into a kind of flour. The taste can be bitter, dry, or strange. The thought of eating them may be almost as difficult as the eating itself. A tulip bulb carries memory, gardens, spring, colour, ordinary beauty. Hunger takes that symbol and places it on a chopping board. You look at the bulb and understand that survival does not always arrive in a form that comforts the imagination. Still, people cook what they can. They make soup from sugar beets. They grind grain if they find it. They stretch potatoes with water. They share when possible. They queue for relief when it arrives. Children grow thin. Adults lose strength. Bodies begin to conserve every movement. The day becomes a sequence of practical questions. Is there fuel? Is there water? Can the stove be lit? Who must walk? What can be traded? What can be eaten safely? No one asks whether the meal is nice. Nice belongs to another season. Yet even here, families try to keep order. A table is set if there is a table left. Portions are divided. A child's bowl is filled first. Someone saves a little for the weakest person. A mother may joke softly about the bulb because children need fear to enter the room in smaller pieces, but the joke is thin and careful. The real tenderness is in preparation. Peeling, boiling, watching, serving, making something frightening seem manageable for the length of one meal. Relief does come eventually, through Allied efforts, negotiated food drops, aid shipments, and liberation, but hunger leaves memory behind. People remember the taste of sugar beet. They remember walking. They remember the sound of wooden shoes or bicycle wheels on frozen roads. They remember which household item was traded and what it became. You return near dusk with the bicycle heavier than before if the trip has succeeded, or heartbreakingly light if it has not. The kitchen is colder than you hoped. The bulb waits on the board, stripped of its garden life. You cut it carefully. A child asks what it is. You answer simply, because too much explanation would not improve the flavour. It is supper tonight. The pot warms slowly. Steam rises, faint and bitter, and the room gathers around it. Spring will come again, but for now it has been sliced thin and boiled. You wait in a crowded Warsaw room while someone small enough to pass through danger searches for food outside. German authorities seal Jewish families inside the ghetto and issue rations deliberately far below what people need to live. Soup kitchens, mutual aid, barter, hidden stores and smuggling become essential to survival. Children carry bread or potatoes through gaps, over walls, and past guards, because an entire family may depend on what fits beneath a coat. This is not thrift, and it is not charming invention. It is hunger under persecution. The door opens. A child steps inside and places a few pieces of food on the table. Everyone understands what they cost. The room holds too many people and too little air. Coats hang from nails. Bedding is folded where there is space. A stove, if there is one, cannot warm everyone. Food is never merely difficult here. It is controlled as part of a system meant to degrade, weaken, and destroy. The ration issued by German authorities to Jewish residents is not enough to sustain life. Disease spreads. Work, cold, crowding, and hunger press together. People sell belongings until there is almost nothing left to sell. They trade watches, coats, books, candlesticks, fabric, tools, and family objects for bread, potatoes, flour, fat, or a bowl of soup. Each trade removes another piece of the life that existed before the walls. A table becomes food, a wedding gift becomes a loaf. A child's coat may become a few days of calories while the child is still cold. You sit near the table and listen for footsteps. The person outside may be a child because children can move through spaces adults cannot. Some crawl through holes, slip through openings, climb walls, or pass goods through hidden routes. They may cross to the other side of the city, barter, beg, buy, carry, and return under threat from guards, police, informers, hunger, and exhaustion. This is not adventure. It is danger assigned to the small because the family has run out of safer choices. A potato beneath a coat can mean life. A piece of bread can decide whether someone rises tomorrow. Every sound near the door matters. In the ghetto, food systems are layered. There are official rations, too small and cruelly inadequate. There are soup kitchens, some organised by Jewish relief groups struggling under impossible conditions. There is mutual aid, where people share what little they can. There is trade, illegal, desperate, and necessary. There are people with more resources who can buy food at high prices, and people with nothing who weaken quickly. Hunger is uneven, even inside persecution, and that unevenness carries pain of its own. You may see a person with bread and another person watching them with eyes that cannot look away. You may see someone save a bite for a parent, a sibling, a child. You may see someone too hungry to save anything at all. No easy moral sentence belongs in that room. The body under starvation is not a lesson. It is a body trying to live. The pot in the corner may hold thin soup, perhaps with a little vegetable, a scrap of grain, or mostly hot water given the dignity of a ladle. A queue for soup may be long. The bowl may be the day's main food. Bread is weighed, divided, hidden, guarded. Families make rules. This piece for the worker, this part for the child, this bit saved for later. Someone must be strong enough to stand in line. Someone must keep enough strength to work. Someone must stay alive through the night. Diaries and testimonies record food with heartbreaking precision because hunger makes memory count differently. A spoonful, a slice, a potato, a crust, each receives attention. You wait. The room is quiet in the way crowded rooms become quiet when everyone is listening for the same person. At last, the door opens. The child comes in pale with cold, carrying food that looks far too small for the danger it required. Perhaps bread, perhaps potatoes, perhaps a little flour. Hands reach, then stop. There must be division. There must be order, because order is one of the last protections left. You want to feed everyone at once, but the food must be made to last longer than appetite can bear. The child may say little. Sometimes children who have done dangerous things do not explain them immediately. They place the food down and become children again only in brief flashes, when someone touches their hair or warms their hands. You take the pieces and begin to plan the meal. Nothing will be wasted. Peels, crumbs, water, heat, and time will all be used. If soup can be made, soup will be made. If the bread must be divided, the knife will move slowly. The room watches with the concentration of people who know that fairness is a form of love when there is not enough. This is where the usual language of wartime thrift falls away. There is no cheerful lesson in stretching leftovers, no quaint complaint about a substitute. There is only persecution, hunger, and the will to keep one another alive under conditions designed to break that will. You set the food on the table, it is not enough. Yet everyone leans toward it because life often arrives in amounts that feel insulting and must still be received. Outside the wall, the city continues. Inside, a few potatoes carry the weight of a family's tomorrow. The wireless announces victory, church bells ring, and people gather in streets where many kitchen shelves remain thin. War does not end shortages overnight. Farms, ships, railways, factories, ports, money and homes all need time to recover. Britain keeps rationing for years after the fighting stops, while families across Europe depend on relief supplies, parcels, gardens, barter, and habits learned during scarcity. People still save dripping, scrape plates, and hesitate before throwing away bread. You open the ration book once more and smooth the page with your hand. Peace has arrived. Supper is still being repaired. Outside, the street carries a sound you have not heard for years, relief mixed with disbelief. People call to one another, doors open, flags appear, and children run where adults had grown used to walking carefully. The news is enormous, too large for the kitchen, and yet the first ordinary question soon returns. What is there for tea? That may sound small after victory, but families do not live on announcements. They live on bread, fuel, milk, potatoes, transport, wages, and systems war has bent out of shape. A war can end in a broadcast, but a food supply cannot. Ships must be released from military work, ports must be repaired, farms need labour, animals, seed, machinery, and time. Railways and roads must carry civilian goods again. Factories must change production. Countries that have been occupied need relief, rebuilding, and harvests not yet grown. Money, housing, health, and grief all sit down at the table too, whether invited or not. In Britain, rationing continues long after victory in Europe, and even after the final end of the war. Some foods remain controlled because shortages continue. Imports are limited, debts are heavy, and feeding both Britain and parts of recovering Europe is a vast task. Bread, which was not rationed during the war itself, is rationed after the war for a period, a detail that feels almost designed to test public patience. Sweets, meat, fats and sugar continue to require discipline. The old habits remain because the old conditions have not fully disappeared. You still keep the ration book safe. You still check the allowance. You still save bones, dripping, crumbs, jars, string, paper bags, and anything else that might be useful later. Peacetime enters the kitchen wearing a worn coat. Across Europe, the situation is often far harder. Cities have been bombed, farms have been damaged, livestock has been taken or killed, transport networks are broken. Millions of people are displaced, returning, searching, or waiting in camps. Relief supplies from allied agencies, charities, and armies become essential. Parcels arrive from relatives or strangers. Tins of meat, powdered milk, coffee, chocolate, flour, fats, and sugar can seem almost unreal to families who have lived for years on thin soup, substitutes, and careful division. A parcel is not only food, it is proof that somewhere else a cupboard still has enough to send. That can be comforting and also painful. Abundance seen from hunger may look like a foreign language. You open a tin and smell richness that feels almost too strong. You cut bread and still hesitate before making the slice thick. You put sugar into tea and stop halfway, trained by years of restraint. Scarcity does not leave the body at once. Hands remember, the knife remembers. The person who cooked through the war may continue scraping plates long after the plate could afford to lose a crumb. Children who grew up with shortages may treat sweets with ceremony. Adults may store tins in cupboards beyond reasonable need because a full shelf quiets something inside them. The habits that once meant survival become character, then family stories, then small household rules nobody questions. Do not waste bread. Keep the dripping. Save the string. Finish what is on the plate. These phrases travel beyond the war. They appear in kitchens decades later, softened by time but still carrying the old weather. There is relief, certainly. There is celebration. There is music in the street and laughter that sounds surprised to be back. But there is also mourning. Empty chairs remain empty. Some people do not return. Some return changed. Some homes are gone, some cupboards are full before others. Peace does not distribute comfort evenly. In one house, a parcel brings coffee and chocolate. In another, supper is still potatoes and a little fat. In another, someone is trying to feed a child born into aftermath, not battle, yet still shaped by it. You place the ration book on the table and run your fingers over its creased cover. For years it has been part of every meal, as familiar as the kettle and less loved. It has annoyed you, guided you, limited you, and sometimes protected you from worse unfairness. Now it feels like something from the old world that has not yet left the new one. The kettle warms. A small meal is prepared. Perhaps there is bread, tea, potatoes, a little cheese, or something from a parcel saved for the right moment. The table is still plain, but the air is different. You eat slowly because the habit of careful eating remains. Victory has opened the door, but it has not filled the pantry. That will take seasons, ships, harvests, labour, and time. For now, someone folds the ration book and returns it to the drawer. Peace has arrived in the street, but in the kitchen, it is still learning where everything is kept. And now, you can let the wartime kitchen grow quiet. You have stood beside ration books, careful scales, thin shelves, patient queues, powdered eggs, serious loaves, guarded butter, reused tea leaves, small meat parcels, vegetable pies, faithful potatoes, muddy gardens, school dinners, sweet tins, jars cooling on the table, public restaurants, shelter sandwiches, strange country kitchens, American point charts, occupied markets, substitute coffee, famine pots, siege bread, tulip bulbs, and food carried through danger by hands that should have been holding toys instead. Some of this world was practical. Some of it was strange. Some of it was dark enough that even the warmest kitchen voice must grow still for a moment. Yet through all of it, ordinary people kept trying to feed one another. They saved crumbs, stretched soup, shared milk, planted seeds, carried parcels, stood in lines, traded belongings, protected children, and return to the table even when the table had very little to give back. Their resilience was not always loud. Often it looked like scraping a pan, folding a ration book, wiping a child's mouth, or pretending that a thin supper was perfectly acceptable because someone smaller needed courage more than truth. So as you drift back toward your own room, your own quiet, and your own modern kitchen waiting somewhere beyond the dark, you may feel a little softer toward the comforts around you. The bread that waits without permission, the light that turns on, the kettle that asks for nothing dramatic. The meal that does not need a stamp, a cue, or a whispered bargain. Not smugly, and not forgetfully, but gently grateful. Let those old kitchens fade now. Let the counters clear, the jars cool, the wireless lower, and the ration books close for the night. You have travelled far enough. Pull the blanket higher, rest your hands, breathe slowly, and let sleep come in like a warm meal after a very long day.